Hey there, tonight we're uncovering why you wouldn't last a day in a colonial tavern. Imagine rowdy debates over politics, clouds of pipe smoke, and the surprising role these raucous spaces played in shaping a nation. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You find yourself blinking away the haze of sleep in a world that's a few centuries and several comfort levels away from your usual morning routine. It's 1774, and you're waking up in colonial America. No, there's no Wi-Fi to check the morning news, and the closest thing to social media is the town crier, who, spoiler alert, is not as entertaining as TikTok. Now, as you stretch and rise, it hits you. You're in a world where the Colonial Tavern is the beating heart of the community. Forget Starbucks. This is where the real brew is served, and it's not just about the drinks. Taverns here are the Swiss Army knives of social venues. Inns, post offices, courtrooms, and community bulletin boards, all rolled into one. They take multitasking to a level that would make even the busiest millennial blush. Let's start by setting the scene. The architecture of these taverns is as much about function as it is about form. Picture a large, sprawling building, maybe 2 stories, with a facade that's seen better days, but stands sturdy against the winds of time. Inside, it's a mix of cramped spaces and open halls, with low ceilings that seem to conspire to keep conversations close and intimate. The floors creak underfoot, whispering secrets of the countless boots that have trodden them over the years. Before you even step through the door, the tavern assaults your senses. The smell is, well, let's call it robust. Imagine a cocktail of tobacco smoke, spilled ale, and the kind of body odor that comes from people who believe bathing is more of an annual suggestion than a daily ritual. Underneath, there's the earthy scent of wood smoke from the hearths that burn tirelessly, warding off the chill of the colonial air. Now, why are these places so critical? In a world without Yelp reviews to guide you to the latest hipster hangout, the tavern is the local hub, the original social network where news travels at the speed of gossip. It's where you get your mail, find out who's been naughty or nice, and maybe catch a glimpse of the latest political pamphlet. Paul Revere himself was known to frequent several of these establishments, probably plotting his famous midnight rides over a pint or two. But let's not romanticize it too much. These taverns were also where the more unsavory business went down. Disputes were settled here, sometimes with words, often with fists, and occasionally with weapons. They served as informal courts where justice was dispensed with more enthusiasm than fairness. The barkeep could be the closest thing to a judge you might encounter, meting out sentences with the same hand that pours your drink. And let's talk about drinks. The ale is the lifeblood of these taverns, flowing as freely as the conversation. It's not just a beverage, it's a staple, safer than the water that might be teeming with all sorts of colonial-era nasties. A pint of ale might set you back a few pennies, which, in today's terms, is a bargain for avoiding dysentery. The tavern is also a political hotbed. In 1774, tensions are simmering like a pot left too long on the fire. The colonies are standing on the precipice of revolution, and taverns are where the ideas of liberty and independence are brewed as much as the ale. It's here that ordinary folk become extraordinary revolutionaries, fueled by fiery rhetoric and perhaps a bit too much rum. So, as you prepare to step into this colonial cauldron of camaraderie and chaos, take a moment to appreciate the sheer importance of these establishments. They are the lifeline of the community, a place where the grand tapestry of history is woven one thread, one pint, and one heated debate at a time. And as you cross the threshold, prepare yourself for a day unlike any other. It's not just a tavern, it's the epicenter of colonial life, where every conversation could change the course of history, or at least lead to a good story at the next gathering. As the door swings open, you're hit with a wall of sound, a cacophony of boisterous laughter, clinking mugs, and the occasional shout that suggests someone just lost at cards, or perhaps stumbled upon a nugget of revolutionary fervor. Welcome to the Colonial Tavern, circa 1774, where the social dynamics are as intricate as the lace on a lady's barnet. Let's start with the lineup. Unlike today's bars, where patrons are segregated by their choice of overpriced craft beers, colonial taverns were democratic in their chaos. Farmers rubbed shoulders with merchants, who exchanged nards with politicians. It's an egalitarian gathering, but don't be fooled. There's a hierarchy as rigid as a redcoat's collar. In this melting pot, your status isn't determined by your Instagram follow account, but by your land, your wealth, and occasionally your ability to hold your ale. Speaking of ale, let's dive into the economics of imbibing. Back in 1774, a pint of ale cost about a penny or two. Now, before you start lamenting about the price of your last IPA, consider this. The average colonial labourer earned around 2 shillings a day, which means a pint could cost a fraction of a hard day's sweat. That's like working 2 hours in today's economy just to enjoy a craft brew. And let's be clear, this ale isn't the harpy nectar you might be used to. It's more of a liquid bread, thick and murky, but crucially, devoid of the dysentery that lurked in unfiltered water. So, who are you sharing this space with? Imagine a farmer, his hands calloused from tilling the unforgiving New England soil, seated beside a lawyer who spends his days untangling the web of colonial law. Across the room, a sailor with tails as tall as the main mast haggles with a merchant over the price of molasses. And in the corner, a group of young radicals is whispering about a fellow named Samuel Adams, whose name you might recognize from a certain beer label, but who was more renowned in his day for inciting rebellion than for brewing. However, the social codes here are more complex than the latest tick-tock dance. You see, in colonial taverns, manners mattered. There were unwritten rules as binding as the king's edicts. For instance, if you spill someone's drink, you've committed a faux pas graver than forgetting the words to Yankee Doodle. Such an error could lead not just to a scuffle, but to a full-blown brawl. In a world where personal honor was tightly bound to public perception, spilling ale was akin to a declaration of war. Then there's the issue of seating. It's not a free-for-all. You don't just plop down wherever you fancy. Regulars have their spots as sacred as a pew in church. Sit in the wrong place, and you might find yourself on the receiving end of a glare sharper than a bayonet. And heaven forbid you misjudge a jest. What you consider banter might be taken as an affront, leading to a duel of words or worse. But amidst this order and chaos, there's a camaraderie that transcends time and social class. The tavern is a place where news travels at the speed of gossip, and where ideas, nascent and revolutionary, are nurtured. It's here that the seeds of independence are sown, debated over rum punch and sealed with the clink of mugs. Now, let's not ignore the thorny politics. As the colonies inch toward revolution, every conversation is tinged with the question of loyalty to the crown or to the burgeoning idea of an independent America. These taverns are the informal stages for debates that shape the future, where the rhetoric is as fiery as the hearths that keep the chill at bay. You might overhear a heated discussion about the latest taxes imposed by King George Roman III, or perhaps a hushed conversation about the clandestine meetings of the Sons of Liberty. The tavern, in all its smoky, crowded glory, is more than a watering hole. It's a crucible of history, where every pint poured could lead to a new pact of rebellion, or at the very least, a spirited argument about the price of tea. As you consider ordering another round, remember that each drink is a ticket into the bustling, unpredictable theater of colonial life, where the stakes are as high as the ideals being forged. In this vibrant microcosm of colonial society, the tavern serves as both a window into the past and a mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature. It's a place where the everyday and the extraordinary collide, where the echoes of history can still be heard clinking in the glasses and whispered in the corners. So, as you nurse your pint and soak in the atmosphere, consider yourself part of a grand narrative, woven with threads of camaraderie, conflict, and perhaps a bit too much ale. But let's not get too carried away by the romance of it all. Sure, the tavern sounds like a charming hub of colonial camaraderie, but it also held a darker allure, like the shadowy corners of a Dickens novel. First up, let's talk about gambling. If you think Vegas is the city of sin, these colonial taverns were the original dens of iniquity. Dice games, card games, and even betting on cockfights were all part of the day's entertainment. And here's a fun fact. The term high roller could have applied just as easily back then, except at a slightly different scale. While today's high stakes might involve thousands of dollars, back in 1774, your average gambler might risk shillings or even pounds, which could be a week's wages for the daring or the foolish. The stakes weren't just financial. Losing a bet could mean losing your reputation, something far more valuable in a society where your name was your bond. And heaven help you if you couldn't pay up. Debts were often collected with the sort of enthusiasm that might involve a broken nose or a trip to the Starks. Yes, those charming wooden contraptions where you could enjoy the fresh air and public humiliation simultaneously. Now, if you were hoping for a quiet pint and a pleasant chat, you might be out of luck. Brawls were as much a part of tavern life as the ale itself. Not just your garden variety bar fights. Mind you, these could be downright legendary. Picture this. A raucous dispute over a game of whist suddenly escalates, and before you know it, chairs are flying, mugs are shattering, and someone's wig is decidedly askew. In a world where personal honor and reputation were the currency of the realm, even a minor slight could ignite a brawl that would make WWII look tame by comparison. But if you think the chaos ended with a bruised ego or a couple of black eyes, think again. Sometimes, these disputes spilled over into the legal realm, or at least the colonial version of it. Remember, the tavern could double as a courtroom, and the barkeep might find himself playing judge and jury. It was frontier justice with a side of ale, and if you were lucky, it ended with a handshake and a round for everyone involved. If not, well, there was always the chance of a more formal duel, pistols at dawn, and all that jazz. However, if your interests leaned more towards espionage than pugilism, colonial taverns had something for you too. These establishments were the original under-the-radar meeting spots for exchanging secretive whispers about the latest tax laws or the growing tensions with Britain. Political espionage was as much a part of tavern culture as the ale and brawls. Picture a scene straight out of a spy novel, but swap trench coats for tricorn hats. Men huddled in shadowy corners, whispering about the latest movements of the British troops or passing along messages wrapped in the folds of a carefully folded newspaper. And let's not forget the Sons of Liberty, who used these very taverns as their meeting places to hatch plans that would eventually lead to the American Revolution. These weren't just drunken rants against the crown. They were calculated risks that could easily end in charges of treason. Speaking out against the crown was akin to playing with fire in a world where loyalty was demanded, not earned. And yet, it was in these dimly lit rooms, amidst the clatter and clamor, that the seeds of revolution were planted. So, while the tavern might seem like a quaint slice of colonial life, it was also a powder keg waiting to explode. Every ale-soaked conversation could be the spark that lit the fuse. Here, in the heart of the tavern, was where the ordinary met the extraordinary, where the course of history was debated over a pint. The stakes were high, and the players were ordinary men with extraordinary courage, or at least a healthy dose of liquid courage. As you nurse your drink and listen to the rising crescendo of voices around you, remember this. The Colonial Tavern was more than just a place to wet your whistle. It was a crucible where the heat of debate, the fire of revolution, and the cold reality of human nature all mixed to create something truly transformative. So, as you sit amidst the chaos and camaraderie, know that you're not just part of a night out. You're sitting in the very forge of history, where every clink of a mug might echo through the ages. And as you ponder what to say next, remember that in this world, words are as potent as any weapon, capable of inciting both change and chaos. And as the evening sun dips behind the colonial skyline, casting long shadows that stretch like a cat's lazy limbs, the tavern cranks its social gears into overdrive. It's the 18th century equivalent of a Netflix binge, but with more ale and less chill. You see, as the night settles in, the tavern transforms from a place of business and debate into an entertainment mecca. This isn't your granny's knitting circle. No, we're talking bawdy songs, illicit games, and enough scandal to keep the local gossips buzzing for weeks. First up, let's talk music. If you think today's top 40 hits are catchy, imagine songs that have survived centuries. These tavern tunes were the earworms of their day, and they were often bawdier than a stand-up routine at a comedy club. We're talking about songs that could make a sailor blush, filled with double entendres and cheeky tales of love and misadventure. It's a kind of communal karaoke where everyone knows the lyrics, even if they don't always remember the night before. These tunes were passed along orally, which is probably why they avoided the censor's pen. No written record, no problem. But music wasn't just for fun. It served as a social glue, binding communities in shared experiences. The songs often chronicled local legends or recent events, the musical equivalent of your Facebook newsfeed. It was a way to spread information or misinformation, depending on who had the loudest voice and the largest mug of ale. Now, let's turn our attention to the games. Ah, the games. If you think today's high-stakes poker tournaments are intense, you ain't seen nothing yet. Card games like whist and loo were the rage, and while you might not find them on ESPN, they were the talk of the tavern. Stakes varied from modest to astronomical. Shillings, pounds, or even property could be on the line. Imagine betting your horse or a parcel of land in a game where the cards are as slippery as the dealer's ethics. Gambling in these taverns was as much about the thrill as it was about the spoils. The risk, the adrenaline, the social drama, it was all part of the package. But losing could sting more than just your pocket. A bad beat could see you in debt, and debt collection in 1774 wasn't exactly a friendly phone call from the bank. Fail to pay up, and you might find yourself in the stocks or worse, cooling your heels in a dank jail cell while you ponder your life choices. But don't think it was all cards and dice. Cockfighting was another popular, albeit brutal, form of entertainment. It was a spectacle that drew crowds eager to place bets on their chosen champions. It might sound barbaric, but this was a time when blood sports were as mainstream as today's sports leagues. The clamour of bets being placed, the tension of the crowd, the violence, it was all a part of the evening's dark allure. Of course, not all entertainment was legal or moral by today's standards. In fact, the very activities that made the tavern a lively place could also land you in trouble with the local authorities. Public drunkenness was frowned upon, and the colonial justice system didn't mess around. Spend a night singing too loudly, gambling too recklessly, or brawling too enthusiastically, and you could find yourself the guest of honor in the town stocks, where you'd enjoy the fresh air and the not-so-fresh produce hurled by your neighbors. It's easy to romanticize these taverns as homes of raucous fun and fellowship, but let's not forget the darker undertones. These places were breeding grounds for vice and violence, where personal feuds could explode like gunpowder. And yet, the allure was undeniable. The tavern was a stage where life's dramas played out, with everyone eager for a starring role. Now, as the night deepens and the ale flows freer, keep an eye out for the subtle exchanges happening in the corners. These aren't just drunken whispers. They're often clandestine conversations, the kind that could change the course of history. Remember, a tavern is where Paul Revere might have shared a quiet word about his midnight ride, or where Benjamin Franklin could have mused over his latest invention with a fellow thinker. In this heady mix of merriment and mischief, every patron is a player on history's stage, each decision a potential pivot point. The tavern is a crucible, melting down the raw ores of colonial life into something enduring and transformative. It's a place where the mundane meets the momentous, where every night holds a new story waiting to be told, and where the clinking of mugs echoes with the promise of what might be. As the evening wears on, you'll see why these taverns were the Netflix of their day, offering a blend of drama, comedy, and reality TV that could make even the most jaded modern viewer sit up and take notice. So, as you sit nursing your drink, remember that you're not just a spectator in a bygone era. You're part of a living, breathing history where every conversation, every gamble, and every song carries the weight of the world yet to come. As the night dwindles into the early morning hours, you might find yourself weaving down a cobblestone path, propelled by a heady mix of ale and camaraderie. But beware, dear tavern-goer, colonial mornings are notoriously unkind to those who overindulge. You see, hangovers in 1774 were as inevitable as taxes, and as unpleasant as a visit from the tax collector himself. Let's dive into the so-called remedies of the day, which were less about science and more about hope and desperation. One popular cure involved the consumption of ploughman's lunch, essentially a hearty meal of bread, cheese, and pickles. The theory, sopping up leftover alcohol with something solid might just coax your body back to the land of the living. Alternatively, some brave souls swore by the hair of the dog. Yes, the same concept we use today. They'd guzzle down a morning pint, hoping that a little alcohol would scare away the hangover demon. Spoiler alert. It was about as effective as using a thimble to bail out a sinking ship. Then there was the infamous switchel, a concoction made from cider vinegar, water, a bit of sweetener, and ginger. Switchel was the Gatorade of its day, touted for its supposed ability to replenish lost electrolytes, though they had no idea what electrolytes were. You might catch a whiff of vinegar as you pass by your fellow sufferers, each clutching their mugs with a determination that spoke more of necessity than belief. Despite these homebrew remedies, the colonial hangover was more than just a personal plight. It had societal implications. Taverns were the epicenters of community life, but they also fostered a culture of excess and escapism. In a world where life was harsh and uncertain, the tavern offered an outlet, a place to forget the unyielding toil of the day, even if only for a while. But the morning after often brought a sobering reality, one that mirrored the colony's murky political future. As America crept toward modernization, the role of the tavern began to shift. The Industrial Revolution of the 19th century brought about significant changes. Railroads and telegraphs connected distant towns, and suddenly the tavern's role as a hub of communication diminished. New social establishments, like gentlemen's clubs and more formalized political meeting spaces, began to emerge. The tavern, once the stage for political and social dramas, started to lose its centrality in American life. Yet, it's not just the industrial age that nudged taverns into the shadows. There was also a growing temperance movement that argued, with fervor, against the evils of alcohol. This movement gained momentum in the early 19th century, eventually leading to the 18th Amendment and Prohibition. Imagine, if you will, a world where the tavern's vibrant energy is replaced by the silence of closed doors and shuttered windows. It was a seismic cultural shift, one that would transform the American social landscape. But even as taverns faded from prominence, their legacy endured. They left behind a romanticized image of camaraderie and rebellion, a place where ideas were born and revolutions stoked. The Colonial Tavern became a symbol of American resilience, a reminder of a time when ordinary people gathered to shape extraordinary futures. There's a certain allure in the idea of men like Paul Revere and Samuel Adams, not just as revolutionaries, but as frequenters of these lively halls. It's a vision of history that's hard to resist, even if it glosses over the grime and grit of reality. In retrospect, the Colonial Tavern was more than just an establishment. It was a crucible of democracy, a place where voices were heard and plans hatched over ale and rum. It was both the heartbeat of the colonial community and a microcosm of its contradictions. Here, liberty was toasted amidst the clinking of mugs, and the idea of America was debated, refined, and ultimately realized. So, as you leave this bygone world behind, nursing the echoes of a colonial hangover, remember that history isn't just found in textbooks. It's in the stories whispered over a pint, in the laughter shared across a table, and in the quiet determination of those who dared to dream. The Colonial Tavern may have been noisy, chaotic, and at times unruly, but it was undeniably human, a reflection of all the messy, glorious potential that comes with a gathering of people seeking something more. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth toasting to. Ah, the life of a medieval castle servant. Not quite the fairy tale you were sold, huh? Let's just say, if you've been dreaming of stone corridors and towering battlements, you might want to pinch yourself awake. Welcome to a world where your charmingly cramped living quarters come with a daily grind that makes modern hustle culture look like an extended spa day. First off, let's talk about your humble abode, or the lack thereof. You're not exactly lounging in the lap of luxury. Picture this, a tiny stone room, if you're lucky enough to have one to yourself, with walls that could double as ice blocks in the winter months. Heating, you've got a woolen blanket and a prayer. And let's not forget your roommates, the rats and fleas, who are always ready to join the party. The great hall might be grand, but your corner of the castle is more like a medieval studio apartment, sans the kitchenette. Every morning, you pry yourself out of this cozy nook before the sun even thinks about rising. Why? Because you've got a 14-hour workday waiting to greet you with open, calloused arms. Forget about those 9 to 5. The medieval clock runs on daylight, and you're on its schedule. Whether it's scrubbing the stone floors until they gleam brighter than the Lord's armor, or hauling firewood to keep those drafty halls a smidgen warmer, your to-do list is longer than a night's training regimen. Now, let's dive into the thrilling world of medieval economics. Spoiler alert, it's not in your favor. You might think that serving in a castle would earn you a decent paycheck. Think again. Your payment, room and board, and maybe a handful of coins if your lord's feeling particularly generous. In real terms, that's like getting paid in Monopoly money with a side of gruel. The economic hierarchy is as rigid as those stone walls you scrub daily. At the top, the lord and his family enjoy the spoils of feudalism, while you, the loyal servant, are tethered firmly to the bottom rung, holding the whole castle operation together with sheer will and a broom. Here's a fun fact. The average pay for a medieval servant could be as low as a few pence a month. To put that into perspective, a skilled craftsman could earn about 6 pence a week, and that was just barely enough to keep the family fed. As a castle servant, you're basically working for the medieval equivalent of exposure, hoping that your loyalty earns you a scrap from the lord's table, or, if you're really lucky, a pair of shoes that fit. But hey, at least there's the joy of serving in such a grand setting, right? Well, let's debunk that myth while we're at it. Castles might look impressive, but they're more about function than comfort. Those towering stone walls, great for keeping out invaders, but they also keep in the cold and damp. The grandeur of the Great Hall, it's mostly for show, a place for the lord to entertain his guests and flaunt his wealth. You, on the other hand, are usually tucked away in the kitchens or scurrying through hidden passageways, making sure everything runs smoothly behind the scenes. Socially, the castle is a microcosm of the feudal system. Above you are layers of hierarchy that dictate your every move. The lord and lady, of course, reign supreme, followed by knights, squires, and a slew of other roles. You, dear servant, are the unsung hero who keeps the gears turning, often invisible to those enjoying the fruits of your labor. But don't worry, you're not entirely invisible. You're sure to be noticed if you make a mistake. When it comes to food, you're not exactly dining on roast swan and fine wine. Your meals are more on the lines of porridge, bread, and the occasional bit of meat if the cook's feeling generous. It's sustenance, not satisfaction. And while the lord and his guests feast in the great hall, you're likely eating quickly in the kitchen, ready to leap into action at a moment's notice. Speaking of action, let's talk about your role in the grand scheme of things. Your job is to ensure that the castle runs like a well-oiled machine, from cleaning and cooking to serving, and sometimes even helping with the defense of the castle. You've got to be a jack of all trades, ready to switch from chambermaid to foot soldier if the situation demands it. It's a tough gig, but someone's got to do it. And right now, that someone is you. In short, life as a medieval castle servant comes with its own unique set of challenges. You're living history, sure, but it's not the romanticized version we see in movies. It's gritty, it's grueling, and it's a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt and endure. So next time you hear someone wistfully wishing to live in a castle, you might want to share a few tales from your own experience. Just don't expect them to swap their modern comforts for your charmingly cramped quarters anytime soon. Now, speaking of tales to tell, let's dig into the medieval diet with the enthusiasm of a hungry servant staring down a bowl of questionable stew. You might think life in a castle means dining on roasted peacock with a side of exotic spices. Sorry to burst your turkey leg bubble, but daily meals were more survival mode than culinary delight. Your standard fare, coarse bread and pottage, a kind of thick vegetable stew that probably looked more like something you'd scrub off the floor than something you'd savor. Let's talk bread, the cornerstone of your diet. But before you picture fluffy loaves wafting through a Parisian boulangerie, think more along the lines of a dense, gritty brick. Medieval bread was often made from barley or rye, grains that were hardier and cheaper than wheat. And if you were really out of luck, your bread might be stretched with beans or peas. Yum, right. At least you've got texture covered. Now, onto the stew situation. Pottage wasn't exactly the comfort food that chicken soup is today, more like a medieval mystery stew. What's in it depends on what's scrounged up from the garden or storeroom. Carrots, onions, maybe a cabbage leaf if the garden's been generous. Meat, don't hold your breath. In the pecking order of who gets what, servants had about as much chance of getting a good cut of meat as a snowball in a blacksmith's forge. The scarcity of meat wasn't just about economics, though that was a big part. The average cow was more valuable alive, working fields, than on a dinner plate. Plus, preserving meat was a whole other beast. You're looking at salting, smoking, or drying, none of which were quick or simple processes. So you'd mostly get your protein from legumes or whatever critters you could catch that wouldn't be missed. Rabbit stew, anyone. And let's not forget the logistics of whipping up meals for a castle full of people. Kitchen staff worked harder than a knight in a jousting match, feeding up to 100 mouths or more. Imagine a kitchen without the modern conveniences we take for granted. No fridges, no ovens with precise temperature controls, not even a decent set of measuring cups. Instead, you've got a massive hearth, and everything is cooked over an open fire. Picture a medieval iron chef, minus the iron cookware. The kitchen hierarchy was almost as intricate as the castle's social structure. The head cook, usually a man with the title of Master Cook, ran the show, and beneath him were the spit boys, tasked with the exciting job of rotating large spits of meat over the fire for hours on end. Talk about a heart job. Then there were the scullions, the unsung heroes who cleaned parts so hefty they could double as a knight's shield. They'd spend hours scrubbing, charping, and hauling water, all for the privilege of eating last, once everyone else had been served. If you've ever worked in a restaurant kitchen and thought it was tough, well, you were born in the wrong century, my friend. But for all the daily toil, every now and then, the castle would host a grand feast. Cue the medieval glitz and glamour, or at least what passed for it back then. These feasts were less about eating until you burst, and more about political posturing. They were occasions for the lord to flex his wealth and influence, to demonstrate his hospitality, and to forge alliances. Think of them as the medieval LinkedIn, but with fewer endorsements and more wine. Despite the image of endless tables groaning under the weight of food, these feasts were the exception, not the rule. They were often tied to important events like weddings, victories, or visits from important guests. And while the lord and his high-ranking guests dined on the finest dishes, the rest of the castle's inhabitants were lucky to get a whiff of the roast boar before it was whisked away to the head table. You, as a servant, might get leftovers if you played your cards right, or caught a benevolent glance from a guest too stuffed to eat another bite. These feasts also served as a stage for culinary theatrics. You'd find elaborate dishes like subtleties, which were more about visual impact than taste. Imagine a pastry shaped like a castle or a pie that, when cut open, released live birds, a medieval precursor to dinner theatre. And while these might seem extravagant, remember that they were rare treats, not everyday occurrences. They were designed to dazzle and distract, to make you forget that yesterday's dinner was yet another bowl of pottage. So, there you have it, the not-so-glamorous truth behind the medieval meal plan. While the romanticized vision of castle life might include endless feasting and merriment, the reality was far more grounded and grumbling. The next time you complain about having to cook dinner, just be glad you're not doing it over an open fire with half a dozen demanding lords breathing down your neck. And as you chew on that thought, we'll continue to unravel the gritty details of medieval life in the next chapter. Until then, bon appetit, or as close as it gets in the 14th century. So, as you chew on that gruel-flavored thought, let's plunge into the less savory side of castle life. Hygiene, or the medieval equivalent of a horror show. If you thought your morning rush hour bathroom situation was bad, prepare to be horrified. Welcome to a world where your bathroom is not a room at all, but a chamber part, and where the phrase flush and forget simply doesn't exist. Let's just say, the logistics of medieval sanitation make a Porto party look like a luxury spa. First off, let's address the not-so-royal throne, the chamber part. This was your Goda for, well, going. And once you've done your business, disposing of the results wasn't exactly a glamorous task. Imagine this. In the absence of plumbing, waste was often tossed from windows into the castle moat or the street below. Yes, the same streets you walked on daily. Heads up takes on a whole new meaning when Gardelu, a warning cry meaning watch out for water, is the only thing standing between you and a surprise shower. Talk about raining cats and dogs, right? Now, if you were fortunate enough to have access to a garderobe, an early form of a toilet built into the castle walls, it was essentially a small room with a wooden seat and a chute to, you guessed it, the moat or cesspit outside. These were strategically placed in the outer walls, and while they might sound like an upgrade, they were far from odor-free. The smell was so pervasive that medieval folks believed it warded off evil spirits, because if there's anything demons hate, it's the stench of human waste. Let's not sugarcoat it. Medieval sanitation was a breeding ground for disease. Enter stage left, our unwelcome guest, the Black Death. This bubonic plague pandemic swept through Europe in the 14th century, wiping out an estimated 25 million people, about a third of the continent's population. Thanks, fleas and rats, for hitching a ride on those trade ships and making history one of the worst pandemics ever. And while we're on the topic of disease, let's not forget the delightful array of other maladies that thrived in such conditions. Typhoid, dysentery, and cholera were frequent visitors, thanks to contaminated water and poor sanitation. The medieval world was essentially a petri dish of pathogens, just waiting to leap onto the next unsuspecting host. You could say it was a killer time to be alive, in the most literal sense. Now, you might think, well, surely they bathed to wash away the grime. Ah, if only. Bathing wasn't just infrequent, it was practically a special occasion, like your birthday or a solar eclipse. There was a popular superstition that bathing could open your pores to disease, so many folks bathed maybe once a year, if that. Imagine the joy of communal bathing in a wooden tub filled with tepid water that had already seen more bodies than a medieval battlefield. The irony. While the nobility donned their silk and velvet, trying to mask the stench with perfumes and herbs, the servants, who handled the messiest tasks, were often cleaner by default. You see, the lower classes took more practical, regular dips in rivers or streams when possible, out of necessity rather than luxury. I guess you could say the peasantry was pioneering the natural look. All this filth culminated in a grand paradox. Living in a castle might look luxurious, but it reeked of anything but glamour. The very structures meant to symbolize power and wealth were often plagued by the same foul odors and unsanitary conditions as the poorest hovels. It's like wearing a crown made of gold that smells like it was dredged from the sewer. And yet, the myth of the pristine, majestic castle persists. Why? Because the allure of grandeur is a powerful thing. We love to romanticize the past, to envision knights and ladies in sparkling armor and gowns, without acknowledging the muck and mire beneath their feet. It's like looking at a painting of a beautiful landscape without realizing the artist's studio was a complete mess. But fear not, our journey through the underbelly of medieval life isn't over. Next time, we'll dive into the social dynamics and power plays within the castle walls. Until then, remember, history is as gritty as it is grand, and sometimes the real story stinks. Now, speaking of things that stink, let's wade into the murky waters of castle intrigue, where the drama is more twisted than a medieval tapestry, and the stakes are as high as the castle walls. Living in a castle wasn't all chivalry and courtly love. It was more like a medieval episode of Survivor, complete with alliances, betrayals, and the constant threat of being metaphorically, and sometimes literally, stabbed in the back. First, let's set the stage. Castles were buzzing with a hive of activity, home to everyone from the high-ranking lord and lady to the lowly stable boys. And where there are people, there are politics. Remember, this was an age where a misplaced word could end your career, or worse. So, staying invisible wasn't just a clever strategy, it was a survival skill. Take, for example, the notorious court of King Henry Roman II of England. His reign in the 12th century was marked by a series of power plays that would make Machiavelli proud. Henry's court was a hotbed of intrigue, with nobles jostling for favor and influence. And if you were a servant caught in the crossfire, best to keep your head down and your mouth shut. After all, the wrong comment overheard by the wrong person could see you out of a job or even imprisoned. And speaking of imprisonment, let's talk about the delightful punishments awaiting those who stepped out of line. Castles had dungeons for a reason, and they weren't just for show. Minor infractions could land you in a cold, dark cell faster than you could say, "I didn't do it." Forget about a fair trial. Justice was often swift and brutal. Theft, for instance, could result in a hand being chopped off, while gossiping about the lord might land you on the receiving end of a flogging. It was an era where the phrase "loose lips sink ships" could be applied quite literally to your social standing or your physical well-being. And then there's the ever-present danger of being caught in a coup or rebellion. Loyalty was a double-edged sword, and depending on which way the political winds blew, yesterday's ally could become tomorrow's enemy. During the Wars of the Roses in the 15th century, for instance, allegiances shifted more often than the tides. Servants found themselves serving one lord one day and another the next, depending on who held the upper hand. It was a constant game of musical thrones, where the music could stop at any moment, leaving you without a seat or a head. But why all this intrigue? Why the constant power struggles? It all boils down to one thing: control. Castles were the nerve centers of power, and controlling one meant controlling the surrounding territory. This was feudalism in action, where land equaled power, and power meant everything. Lords needed to keep their fiefdoms in line, and that often meant keeping their own household in check. A disgruntled servant could become a spy for a rival, or worse, a saboteur. Hence, the need for constant vigilance and a touch of paranoia. Now, you might think that the nobility had it easy, lounging in their plush quarters while the servants toiled away. But the truth was, they were just as ensnared in this web of deceit and danger. Take the example of Richard Roman III, whose rise and fall were marked by betrayal and intrigue worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy, quite literally. The infamous princes in the Tower, Richard's nephews, who mysteriously disappeared, serve as a chilling reminder of the lengths to which people would go to secure power. And while Richard is often painted as the villain, it's crucial to remember that in the cutthroat world of medieval politics, everyone was playing a dangerous game. And then there were the spies. Yes, even in the Middle Ages, espionage was a thriving profession. Lords would employ spies to gather information, both within their own walls and in the courts of their rivals. These agents were the medieval equivalent of James Bond, minus the gadgets, and with a penchant for blending into the background. For a servant, being recruited as a spy could mean extra income or preferential treatment, but it also meant risking everything if caught, being a double agent in a world where treason was punishable by death. Not exactly a career path for the faint-hearted. The reality was that life in a medieval castle was a constant balancing act. You needed to be indispensable enough to keep your position, yet invisible enough to avoid drawing unwanted attention. It was a world where the shadows were your friends, and discretion was your ally. The ultimate irony. Despite the grandiosity of castle life, much of it was played out in the margins, in whispered conversations and furtive glances. So, the next time you find yourself dreaming of living in a castle, remember this. Behind the stone walls and opulent feasts was a world fraught with danger and deceit. It was survival of the shrewdest, where every move could be your last. And as we continue our journey through the medieval maze, keep one eye on the door and the other on your allies. For in the world of castle life, trust was as rare as a warm bath. But for all the plotting and politicking, let's not forget the grim truth that upward mobility in a medieval castle was about as likely as finding a unicorn in the moat. Sure, the allure of knighthood dangled tantalizingly in front of many, like a medieval carrot on a stick, but the reality was a bit more complex. Becoming a knight wasn't just about donning armor and riding into the sunset. It required resources, training, and, most importantly, noble birth. For the average castle servant, whose lineage was as noble as a turnip, the path to knighthood was more of a fantasy than a feasible career path. Knighthood was the medieval equivalent of winning the lottery, an exclusive club that required connections, cash, and commendable combat skills. You could spend years as a squire, learning the ins and outs of battle, only to find your dreams dashed because your family tree didn't branch into the right lineage. And even if you managed to break into the ranks, knighthood came with its own set of challenges. Maintaining armor and horses wasn't cheap, and those noble wars weren't going to fund themselves. A knight might find himself in debt faster than he could say chivalry. Yet, despite these barriers, tales of servants climbing the social ladder do exist, albeit as rare as a warm winter in the Highlands. Take the fascinating case of William Marshall, the son of a minor noble who rose through the ranks to become one of the most powerful knights in England. Sure, he wasn't exactly a commoner, but his story became the stuff of legends, offering a glimmer of hope to those stuck labouring in the shadows of the castle walls. His journey from squire to Earl of Pembroke was filled with more twists than a medieval mystery novel, proving that while the odds were long, they weren't impassable. For the average serf, though, the prospects were decidedly bleaker. Serfs were tied to the land like barnacles to a ship, bound by the chains of feudal duty. They worked the lord's fields, paid their dues, and in return received protection and a patch of earth to call their own, though ownership is a bit generous. The land belonged to the lord, and the serfs were more like caretakers who could be uprooted at a moment's notice. Freedom was an illusion, tucked away like a dream in the back of their minds as they toiled day in and day out. So why didn't they just leave? Well, escaping castle life was about as straightforward as a maze designed by Escher. The medieval world was a patchwork of fiefdoms. each one governed by its own set of laws and customs. Travel was perilous, with bandits lurking on every road and borders patrolled by soldiers who weren't known for their hospitality. Leaving the land without permission could result in severe punishment, and finding a new lord willing to take you in was no small feat. It was a society designed to keep everyone in their place, from the highest lord to the humblest servant. But let's not be too cynical. Every so often, a servant would defy the odds, slipping through the cracks of feudal society like a fox through a henhouse. These stories, rare though they were, fueled the hopes of those who dreamed of a better life. Medieval records tell of a few enterprising individuals who managed to save enough money to buy their freedom or marry into a higher social class. Granted, these tales are the exceptions that prove the rule, but they remind us that human tenacity has always been a force to be reckoned with. As we wrap up our deep dive into the world of medieval castle life, it's time to confront the myths head-on. Castles, for all their grandeur, were fortresses as much as they were homes. Life within their walls was grueling, governed by the relentless march of time and the whims of those in power. The romantic image of knights and fair maidens we've inherited from centuries of storytelling is a tapestry woven with more fantasy than fact. The reality was a stark contrast of stone walls, cold drafts, and a social order as rigid as the armor worn by its champions. Yet, despite the harsh truths, the allure of castles endures. Perhaps it's the promise of adventure, the echo of history that calls to us from those ancient stones. Or maybe it's the enduring human desire to believe in a world where valor and virtue prevail. Whatever the reason, the myth of the medieval castle continues to captivate us. And while the reality might not live up to the legend, it remains a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, surviving and thriving against all odds. So, next time you find yourself daydreaming about life in a medieval castle, remember the unsung heroes who toiled behind the scenes, the servants and serfs who kept the fires burning and the wheels turning, often invisible yet indispensable. Their stories may not be as glamorous as the knight's tale, but they are woven into the very fabric of history, reminding us that every grand narrative is built on the backs of those who lived it. In the end, the legacy of the medieval castle is a complex one, full of contradictions and contrasts. It's a story of power and perseverance, of dreams and drudgery. And while we may never fully unravel the mysteries of the past, we can appreciate the enduring impact of those who came before us. After all, history is more than just dates and battles. It's the story of humanity itself, in all its glorious, gritty reality. In the medieval world, sneezing could get you a lot more than a bless you and a tissue. Picture yourself as a peasant in 14th century England. You work the land, eat mostly barley bread, and occasionally indulge in the medieval equivalent of Netflix and chill, which is more like gather round the hearth and swap exaggerated stories. Now, here's the kicker. You sneeze, and suddenly you're worried that your soul just took an unplanned vacation out of your nostrils. Yeah, your sneeze might have just sent your spirit packing faster than a noble could say, "Serf, fetch my goblet." Why, you ask, would a simple sneeze lead to such metaphysical mayhem? Well, back then, the line between medicine and mysticism was blurrier than a drunk bard's ballad. Without the wonders of modern science, the human body was as mysterious as the recipe for Coca-Cola. Sneezing, with its sudden and violent expulsion of air, seemed like the perfect vehicle for your soul to hitch a ride out of Dodge. This wasn't just idle speculation. It was a genuine concern, fueled by centuries of belief and reinforced by the ever-charming Black Death, which had people sneezing their souls into oblivion by the millions. The origins of this superstition are as murky as a medieval moat. Some theories trace it back to the ancient Greeks, who believed that sneezes were prophetic signs from the gods. Fast forward a few centuries, and this celestial sneeze theory somehow morphed into the notion that sneezes could also expel your soul. It's like a game of historical telephone, where the message gets weirder the further you go. Now, let's talk about the blessing part. Saying "bless you" wasn't just a polite reflex or a throwaway phrase back then. It was a verbal safety net, a kind of medieval life insurance policy. The idea was that the blessing would keep your soul tethered to your body, like an invisible leash preventing it from wandering off into the ether. Think of it as a spiritual seatbelt for your soul's safety during the turbulent ride of a sneeze. The Church, ever the authority on matters of life, death, and everything in between approved of this practice. Pope Gregory I, who reigned from 590 to 604 AD, supposedly instituted the blessing during a plague, thinking that divine intervention was the best way to combat a disease that didn't give a fig about social status. This simple phrase, "God bless you," became a multi-purpose tool, part exorcism, part divine favor, and entirely essential for anyone concerned about their soul's ability to stay put. But why did people cling to these beliefs with the tenacity of a barnacle on a ship's hull? The answer lies in the intersection of ignorance and fear. With no germ theory, no microscopes, and definitely no WebMD, people couldn't just Google, "Why do I sneeze?" and land on a page explaining the histamine reaction of allergies. Instead, they had to rely on the wisdom of the ages, passed down through generations like a family heirloom, albeit one that often came with more curses than blessings. Economic factors played their part, too. Medieval peasants lived in a world where survival was as precarious as a tightrope walk. Diseases could decimate populations faster than you could say, "Ye old pandemic," and superstitions provided a semblance of control in an uncontrollable environment. Saying "bless you" was a small but significant action, a way to assert some mastery over the unknown, like whistling in the dark to ward off ghosts. Socially, these beliefs were reinforced by the community. If everyone around you is convinced that sneezing equals soul loss, you're likely to go along with it. Peer pressure in the medieval village was as effective as it is today, minus the social media shaming. If you didn't say "bless you," you risked being seen as indifferent to someone's spiritual welfare, which could earn you the side-eye from the local gossip mill. Reputation was everything in a close-knit community, and you didn't want to be the one known for letting souls slip through the cracks. So there you have it. The medieval sneeze, a simple act wrapped in layers of superstition, fear, and community dynamics. It's a reminder of just how far we've come, or haven't, depending on your view of modern superstitions. Next time you sneeze, take a moment to appreciate that your soul isn't at risk. Or at least, that's what modern science tells us. But just to be safe, maybe say "bless you" anyway. Old habits die hard, and you never know when history might decide to pay a visit. But let's not get too comfortable with our modern blessings and lack of sneezes as soul vacuums just yet. We're about to dive into an era where witches were the boogeymen, or should I say, boogie women, of the day. Medieval Europe had a flair for the dramatic when it came to supernatural threats, and witchcraft was a top-tier fear factor that made even sneezes seem like a minor inconvenience. Picture a world where a bad harvest or a sudden illness in the village could trigger whispers about the local wise woman who'd been seen gathering herbs at odd hours. Suddenly, everyone's looking at her like she's the one who put the curse in cursed crops. Now, why did witch hysteria grip medieval minds like a particularly stubborn bout of lice? Well, it was a mix of economic, social, and religious factors that turned the fear of witches into a full-blown panic. Let's start with the economy, always a solid scapegoat. In a world where survival was as tenuous as a cat on a hot tin roof, anything that threatened the already precarious balance was cause for alarm. Poor harvests could mean the difference between life and death, and when you're living on the edge, it's easier to blame the old woman with the unusual pet cat than accept the whims of weather and fate. Socially, the witch craze was a convenient way to enforce conformity, just like how saying "bless you" curated a sense of community. Accusing someone of witchcraft served as a sinister form of social control. It was a way to keep everyone in line, ensuring that no one strayed too far from the accepted norms. If you were a woman who spoke her mind or stepped out of the conventional roles, you might find yourself on the wrong end of a witch accusation faster than you could say abracadabra. In a society where reputation was everything, a whisper of witchcraft could ruin lives and reputations quicker than a medieval gossip could spread it. Of course, the church played a starring role in the witch hunt hysteria, fanning the flames with the zeal of a medieval pyromaniac. With the church's endorsement, witch trials became a spectacle that combined religion and fear into a potent brew. The Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1487, was essentially the witch hunter's playbook, and it was second only to the Bible in popularity for a good century. This charming little tome detailed how to identify, interrogate, and eliminate witches with the fervor of a modern-day self-help book. Spoiler alert, the methods were neither kind nor just. The church's involvement wasn't just about piety, it was also about power. By positioning itself as the ultimate authority on matters of witchcraft, the church could extend its influence and tighten its grip on the populace. It was a strategic move that bolstered the church's authority while keeping everyone else living in fear of their neighbors. A win-win for the ecclesiastical elite, if not so much for those accused of cavorting with demons in the moonlight. Now, let's talk about the accessory that's become synonymous with witches, the broomstick. Long before it was a staple of Halloween costumes, broomstick was associated with witchcraft for a couple of reasons. One theory suggests it's all about practicality. In a time when most women were in charge of domestic duties, the broom was a symbol of the household, and linking it to witches was a way to demonize women's traditional roles. Another, more colorful theory involves hallucinogenic salves and ointments, a kind of medieval trip that supposedly involved applying these concoctions to the broomstick and riding it, in a manner of speaking, to a lucidity altered state. Whether or not this actually happened, or was simply a flight of fancy from overly imaginative minds, isn't clear, but it sure adds a psychedelic twist to the tale. The notion of witches riding broomsticks took flight in the public imagination, and like any good urban legend, it grew legs and wings, apparently. This imagery was fueled by woodcut illustrations and tales that spread faster than a medieval ailment. It was a visual shorthand for witchcraft that stuck around, right up until brooms became more closely associated with sweeping than soaring. So, there you have it, a world where witches were the ultimate scapegoats, where social and religious pressures turned paranoia into persecution, and where broomsticks became the most misunderstood household item. It's a time that reminds us how fear can be weaponized, how superstition can spiral out of control, and how the stories we tell can shape our reality in profound ways. But before we get too deep into the witch craze, let's save some of that spellbinding drama for later. There's plenty more to explore in the twisted tapestry of medieval superstition and hysteria, so stay tuned for the next part of our journey through the shadows of history. Just when you thought medieval life couldn't get any more surreal, let's plunge into the world of medieval medicine, a realm where logic and superstition mingled like questionable dance partners at a village fair. Imagine suffering from a fever in this era. Instead of reaching for Tylenol, your local healer might have prescribed a session with some very special guests, leeches. These slimy little fellows were the stars of bloodletting, a practice that makes modern medicine look like a luxury spa treatment. Bloodletting was based on the ancient Greek theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. This theory was as outdated as a floppy disk, but back then it was medical gospel. The belief was that an imbalance in these humours caused illness, and the solution was as straightforward as it was horrifying: drain some blood and hope for the best. Leeches, with their penchant for sucking, were the medieval equivalent of a high-tech vacuum cleaner, thought to restore balance and health with each gulp. Leeches weren't just used willy-nilly. This was a serious business. The process was often prescribed by physicians who charged a hefty fee for their services, making it an economic drain as well as a literal one. Considering money was usually tight for peasants. Paying for a session of leech therapy could mean skipping meals or skimping on other necessities. But what choice did you have when the only other option was to let your humours run amok? Now, leeches weren't the only option for bloodletting. If you were feeling particularly brave or desperate, you could opt for scarification or venesection, fancy terms for cutting open a vein and letting it bleed. These methods were about as pleasant as they sound, and infections were a real risk, though that was just another day in the life of medieval medical care. But wait, there's more. If leeches weren't your cup of tea, perhaps you'd fancy an amulet. That's right. Tiny trinkets were all the rage for warding off the Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the 14th century with the efficiency of a medieval Grim Reaper. These amulets could be made of anything from herbs to gems, each purported to have its own mystical properties. Some even contained written charms or prayers, turning them into spiritual Swiss army knives. The logic behind amulets was a curious blend of faith and desperation. With the plague wiping out an estimated 25 million people, about a third of Europe's population, anything that offered even a glimmer of hope was worth trying. After all, what did you have to lose? Besides, the Church endorsed these talismans, lending them an air of divine credibility. If the Almighty was on board, Who were you to argue? Intriguingly, the roots of this belief in protective charms stretch back to ancient pagan traditions, where objects were thought to hold power. Over time, these ideas were Christianized, melding into a hybrid of spiritual and superstitious practices. It's a fascinating example of how old beliefs can be repurposed to fit new frameworks, like an ancient form of recycling. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer inventiveness of medieval health practices. For instance, if you were feeling peckish for some medieval quackery, you might have tried urine therapy. Yes, you heard that right. Drinking your own urine was believed to cure a myriad of ailments, from asthma to gout. This method might sound like a punchline, but it was seriously considered a cure-all. You have to admire the optimism, if not the taste. Why did people cling to these peculiar practices with the tenacity of a cat to a sunbeam? The answer lies in the intersection of ignorance and necessity. Without modern medical knowledge or resources, people turned to what they understood, rituals and remedies passed down like family recipes. In a world where disease could strike at any moment, offering no explanation or mercy, even the most outlandish treatment was better than doing nothing. The economic angle can't be overlooked either. For those in power, maintaining control often meant keeping the populace in a state of dependency. If the common folk believed that only the educated elite or the church could cure them, it reinforced existing hierarchies. Knowledge was power, and power was a currency more valuable than gold. Socially, these practices were reinforced by community dynamics. Just as saying, "bless you," after a sneeze was a social obligation, participating in shared health rituals was a way to bond with your peers. It was a collective act of hope, a way to demonstrate solidarity in the face of uncertainty. Plus, there was the ever-present fear of being the odd one out, a dangerous position in a society where conformity was key. The medieval medical landscape may seem like something straight out of a grim fairy tale, but it's a testament to human creativity under pressure. It's a reminder of how far we've come, and yet how much we still rely on rituals and beliefs to navigate the unknown. While leeches and amulets might not be your go-to remedies today, the desire for control over our health and destiny remains as strong as ever. As we leave behind the world of medieval medicine, you might be tempted to breathe a sigh of relief. But hold that thought, because we're just getting warmed up. Our next stop is an exploration of medieval culinary quirks and the surprising truths behind some of history's most stubborn myths. Get ready for a feast of historical insights, where facts and flavor come together in a deliciously enlightening way. Stay tuned, because the medieval menu has more surprises in store. Speaking of medieval culinary quirks, let's pivot to another area where medieval minds went wild with superstition: agriculture. If you think organic farming's a trend, try burying a dead cat in your field for a good harvest. Forget compost. This was the medieval farmer's go-to miracle grow. Now, before you picture a medieval farmer as some kind of feline serial killer, let's unpack the logic, or lack thereof, behind this peculiar practice. In a world where the agricultural calendar was as much a mystery as a locked iPhone, people needed all the help they could get to ensure a decent yield. Food security was as precarious as a tightrope walk over a pit of hungry dragons. A bad harvest wasn't just a bummer. It could mean the difference between feast and famine. Economically, peasants were squeezed tighter than a miser's purse strings. Many were subject to the whims of their feudal overlords, who demanded hefty rents and taxes regardless of crop success. Land ownership was a distant dream for most, with the reality being more like long-term leasing from a medieval landlord with a penchant for high interest. In this climate, superstitions provided a shred of hope. A dead cat under the soil was thought to ward off evil spirits and pests, acting as a supernatural scarecrow, if you will. The dead cat routine wasn't someone off, either. It was part of a broader tapestry of agricultural superstitions that read like a medieval farmer's almanac. Consider the tradition of ploughing the witches. This charming belief dictated that ploughing the first furrow in a clockwise direction, akin to winding up a giant soil clock, could prevent witches from cursing your crops. Because nothing says, "I'm serious about farming," like a bit of casual witch warding. The economic desperation that fueled these practices was palpable. With little to no scientific understanding of soil fertility, crop rotation, or pest control, peasants were flying blind. Weather could be as unpredictable as a bard's allegiance, and given the medieval climate, craft failure was an ever-present threat. Throw in the occasional locust, swarm, or hailstorm, and you've got yourself a recipe for agricultural anxiety. Socially, these superstitions served as community rituals, binding people together in a shared act of hope or paranoia, depending on your perspective. In a world where conformity was key, participating in these rituals wasn't just about ensuring your own crops thrived. It was about maintaining your standing in the village. Not joining in could mark you as an outsider faster than a witch could say abracadabra. Religion, of course, played its part. The church, ever the arbiter of medieval life, often viewed these practices with suspicion. Yet, it wasn't above co-opting them, wrapping pagan traditions in a Christian veneer. The ritual of blessing the fields, for instance, became a church-sanctioned event, complete with priestly processions and holy water. This ecclesiastical endorsement was a clever bit of PR, turning what might have been seen as heretical into a holy endeavor. Beyond the fields, another superstition involved livestock. Ever hear of the hair of the dog? Medieval farmers took this literally, believing that feeding their cattle a tuft of hair from a deceased animal would protect them from disease. Logic is as clear as mud, but when cattle were your four-legged savings account, you'd try anything to keep them healthy. Why, you might ask, did these superstitions persist? Part of it was undeniably practical. With limited scientific tools and knowledge, empirical evidence was in short supply. If burying a cat or blessing a cow seemed to work once, even by random chance, it was worth repeating. These rituals offered a semblance of control in an otherwise chaotic world, much like carrying a rabbit's foot or avoiding black cats today. The allure of these practices lay in their simplicity. They required no special equipment or expertise, making them accessible to even the poorest peasants. And in a world where the line between success and starvation was thinner than a pauper's belt, their appeal was undeniable. They were a form of agricultural insurance, albeit one that paid out in superstition rather than silver. Now, let's not romanticize these practices too much. While they provide a fascinating glimpse into the medieval mindset, they also highlight the stark realities of a world without modern science. Peasants were often at the mercy of forces beyond their control, with superstition serving as both a buffer and a bind. Like a medieval Yelp review, these rituals reflected the community's collective anxiety and hope. As we plow through the tangled fields of medieval agriculture, it's clear that these superstitions were more than mere curiosities. They were a testament to human ingenuity and desperation, a reminder of how far we've come, and how much we still rely on a little magic to get by. But don't pack away your cauldron just yet, because our journey through the medieval world is far from over. Next up, we're diving into the murky waters of medieval maritime myths and the seafaring superstitions that steered ships and souls alike. So stay tuned as the tides of history continue to unfold. Ships ahoy! As our medieval maritime adventure sets sail, let's dive into a world where sailors wouldn't dare leave port without a pocketful of superstitions. Picture the high seas as a vast, unpredictable chessboard where every move could be your last. In a time when navigation was more art than science, seafaring superstitions were the sailor's compass, guiding them through waters as treacherous as a medieval moat. Take the albatross, for example. This bird wasn't just a feathered friend. No, it was considered a harbinger of both good and bad fortune. Killing an albatross was said to bring curses upon the ship, a notion immortalized by Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, centuries later. But why all the fuss over a bird? Well, sailors believed the souls of drowned seamen inhabited these creatures, guiding the living through perilous seas. In a world where a storm could sink your ship faster than you could say, land ho, clinging to the idea of a guiding spirit wasn't just comforting, it was essential. Economic pressures played a role here too. Merchant ships were the medieval equivalent of FedEx, transporting goods like spices, textiles, and precious metals across the globe. The stakes were as high as the crow's nest, with fortunes riding on safe passage to trading ports. With livelihoods on the line, sailors turned to superstition as a form of insurance, an invisible lifebuoy in a sea of uncertainty. Let's not forget the infamous mermaids, those seductive sirens of the sea. While today's mermaids are often romanticized, back then they were seen as omens of doom, capable of luring sailors to their watery graves. The myth likely sprang from sightings of manatees or dugongs, which, after months at sea, might have seemed like beautiful maidens to sleep-deprived sailors. It's a classic case of desperation breeding imagination. In an era devoid of the Discovery Channel, any strange creature was fair game for a tall tale or two. The sea itself was as much a mystery as the creatures that allegedly inhabited it. With no GPS or satellite data, sailors relied on the stars and their own intuition to chart their courses. The constellations became celestial road maps, and a clear night sky was the medieval equivalent of a 4G connection. Yet even the stars could be capricious, hidden by storms or obscured by fog. In such unpredictable conditions, superstitions offered a semblance of control, a way to navigate the unknown when the heavens refused to cooperate. But why have these superstitions endured, even in our modern world of maritime technology and satellite navigation? The answer lies in human nature. We're hardwired to seek patterns and explanations, especially in situations that defy logic and predictability. Superstitions fill the void left by uncertainty, offering explanations, however fantastical, for events beyond our control. Whether it's the sailor tossing salt over his shoulder or the airline passenger wearing lucky socks, these rituals serve as psychological anchors in a turbulent sea of unpredictability. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that medieval superstitions have left their mark on more than just sailors. From knocking on wood to ward off bad luck, to crossing fingers for good fortune, these age-old practices have permeated our daily lives. They're the vestiges of a time when the line between reality and the supernatural was as blurry as a foggy horizon. Even in an era dominated by science and reason, superstitions persist, a testament to their enduring appeal. Let's not forget the economic angle. Superstitions can be a lucrative business. Think of the fortune-telling industry, which rakes in billions annually from people seeking guidance from tarot cards, astrology charts, and crystal balls. It's a modern echo of medieval practices, where individuals paid handsomely for amulets and charms to protect them from misfortune. In both cases, the promise of insight or protection, however illusory, offers a sense of control in an unpredictable world. Politically, superstitions have been wielded as tools of power and control. From the medieval church's endorsement of certain beliefs to modern politicians invoking fate or destiny, these practices have often been harnessed to reinforce authority. The manipulation of superstition is as old as history itself, a means to rally followers, justify actions, or maintain the status quo. Socially, superstitions function as a form of cultural glue, binding communities through shared beliefs and rituals. Whether it's a village gathering to bless the fields or a sports team performing pre-game rituals, these practices foster a sense of unity and belonging. They're a way to navigate the complexities of life together, even when the reasons behind them are shrouded in mystery. As we conclude our journey through the labyrinth of medieval superstitions, it's clear that these beliefs were more than just quaint relics of the past. They were a reflection of the human desire to understand and control a world often beyond comprehension. In an era where science and technology have illuminated many of life's mysteries, the fact that superstitions still hold sway is both a nod to our past and a reminder of our enduring fascination with the unknown. So, next time you find yourself knocking on wood or avoiding a black cat, remember that you're part of a long tradition of seeking order in chaos. It's a dance as old as humanity itself, a testament to our unending quest to make sense of the world around us. And who knows? Perhaps, in some small way, these rituals do offer a touch of magic in our everyday lives, a bridge between the seen and unseen, the known and unknown. As you drift off to sleep with these thoughts swirling like ancient sea currents, consider the strange yet comforting truth. While the world may change, our need for a little mystery and magic remains as constant as the tides. Sweet dreams, and may your slumber be free from wandering souls and mischievous mermaids. So you think your job is tough? Try stepping into the worn-out shoes, or rather the threadbare boots, of a medieval watchman. While you're grumbling about the Wi-Fi speed or the boss's latest memo, these guys were out there in the dead of night, pacing cold stone walls, squinting into the pitch-black dark, all for the princely sum of a loaf of bread a day. Yep, that's right. Bread, not Bitcoin. Let's break it down. You're the medieval equivalent of a night owl, but not by choice. Your shift starts when the sun dips below the horizon, and it ends when the roosters got laryngitis from crowing too much. You're patrolling the city walls, which, spoiler alert, are about as comfortable as they sound. These fortifications could stretch anywhere from a few hundred meters to several kilometers, depending on the size of the city. Think of it as your medieval Fitbit challenge, without the luxury of counting steps or burning calories. Your gear. Well, medieval HR wasn't exactly handing out ergonomic equipment. You've got a lantern, more like a flickering candle in a cage, and a club that's seen better days. Armor, that's reserved for the knights who ride around looking all dashing and heroic. You, my friend, are stuck with a simple tunic and maybe a rusty helmet if you're lucky. But hey, at least you don't have to worry about your outfit going out of style. Now, about those duties. Sure, patrolling the walls sounds noble, but much of your job involves enforcing curfews, which means you're essentially a medieval party pooper. It's your job to make sure the local tavern doesn't turn into a raucous all-nighter. If you think telling people to go home is tough now, try doing it when half the town's already deep in their cups after too much mead. And speaking of troublemakers, there are always a few. Late-night brawls, suspicious figures lurking in the shadows, and the occasional thief trying to sneak out with a chicken under his arm. You're the first line of defense against chaos, equipped with nothing but your wits and that trusty club. And let's talk compensation. In a world where the economy is more volatile than a Game of Thrones plot twist, your wage is a steady slap in the face. A loaf of bread a day, if that. In today's terms, imagine working a full shift and getting paid in sandwiches. The bread is likely coarse, made from the kind of flour that would make modern gluten-free enthusiasts shudder. But it keeps you on your feet, which is more than can be said for some of your less fortunate contemporaries. This bread-based economy isn't just a quirky detail. It reflects a broader socio-economic landscape where the gap between the haves and the have-nots is as wide as the moat you're patrolling. The city's rulers live in comparative luxury, dining on rich meats and fine wines, while you're out here haggling for a pint of ale with your daily crust. It's a world where social mobility is more myth than reality, and the chances of climbing the social ladder are about as slim as the threads in your tunic. Don't get me wrong, there's a certain romantic allure to the medieval night watchman, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, standing as a silent guardian of the city. But let's not kid ourselves. The reality is more about freezing fingers, grumbling stomachs, and the constant threat of danger from both outside invaders and internal unrest. It's less Night's Watch from Game of Thrones and more Night's Watch out for that pile of horse manure. The city itself is a bustling organism, teeming with life and noise by day, eerily quiet by night. As a watchman, you see both sides of this medieval coin. You witness the marketplace's vibrant chaos, the streets filled with merchants hawking everything from spices to second-hand swords. But come nightfall, it's your job to ensure those streets don't become overrun with thieves and mischief makers. Each clang of your boots echoes off the stone, a reminder that you're the last line of defense between order and anarchy. And while we might romanticize the medieval era with its knights and castles, it's essential to remember that, for every noble tale, there are 100 untold stories of the ordinary folk who kept the wheels turning. As the humble watchman, you're living proof that history isn't just made by the kings and queens lounging in their towers. It's shaped by the everyday grind, the unsung heroes who kept their communities safe, even if it meant sacrificing their comfort and safety. So next time you're grumbling about your job, think about the medieval watchman. Sure, he didn't have email or Zoom meetings, but he had his fair share of struggles. And the next time you hear the phrase earning your bread, remember that for some folks, that was quite literally what they did, one cold, hungry night at a time. And that bread you're earning, it's not served warm or with a side of organic butter. It's your lifeline, keeping you trudging through a medieval night that's colder than a witch's heart. If you think the weather today is unpredictable, try facing the Middle Ages in a tunic, where your biggest fashion statement is a cloak that barely keeps you from turning into a human popsicle. Winters are brutal and summers, sweltering enough to turn your helmet into a metal sauna. Rain doesn't just dampen your spirits, it soaks your clothes, chills you to the bone, and turns cobblestones into slippery death traps. But hey, at least you're not alone. You've got the constant threat of violence to keep you company. Being a medieval watchman is like having a bullseye stitched onto your back, inviting all sorts of trouble. Your club might fend off a drunken brawl, but it's not much against a gang of thieves eyeing the warehouse district. You're the first responder to every alarm and commotion, racing against time with only your wits and a prayer. And let's not forget the ever-present danger of fire, a medieval city's worst nightmare. In towns where buildings are packed tighter than a hipster's skinny jeans, a single spark can turn your entire beat into an inferno. Training, that's a luxury reserved for the knights. You're more learn on the job than trained professional. Think of it as the medieval version of being thrown into the deep end, hoping you'll swim before the sharks get you. Instruction manuals, forget it. You're relying on instinct and maybe a few tips from the grizzled veteran who's tired of the gig. The most you might get is a quick rundown of hit them before they hit you and yell if something catches fire. And speaking of fire, the city is a tinderbox. Wooden structures, thatched roofs. It's like living in a giant box of kindling. Your job is to spark the first flicker of flame and sound the alarm, but without modern gadgets, it's all about eyeballing it and hoping for the best. When the flames do rise, it's a frantic scramble to form a bucket brigade, passing water hand over hand in a desperate attempt to save what can be saved. It's the original trial by fire, and you're right in the thick of it. Now let's chat about health, or the lack thereof. When you're out in the elements, with the city's waste running down open gutters, it's not just your feet that are in trouble. Disease is a constant shadow, lurking in every corner. The medieval understanding of medicine is, shall we say, rudimentary at best. Catch a cold. You're praying it doesn't turn into something worse. Get a cut on your hand. That could be your ticket to a feverish trip to the afterlife. And if we're talking about the plague, let's just say social distancing wasn't exactly part of the medieval playbook. Romanticized images of medieval duty often omit these delightful details. You're no shining knight atop a horse, charging gloriously into battle. You're more like the unsung hero of a gritty noir film, trudging through the muck, holding back chaos with little more than grit and determination. There's no Instagram filter to make this life look glamorous. You're trading safety and comfort for a shot at duty, hoping the city stays safe and that you make it through another night. But why does any of this matter? Because the truth is, history isn't just the grand tales of kings and conquests. It's in the creak of your boots on cobblestones, the flicker of your lantern in the dark, and the daily grind of survival. Your life as a watchman is a testament to the resilience of ordinary people, those who kept the world turning while others basked in the limelight. It's a reminder that for every story of glory, there's a backdrop of sweat, sacrifice, and a whole lot of bread. So next time you're wrapped up in a cozy blanket complaining about the weather, spare a thought for those medieval watchmen, braving the elements and dangers, one night at a time. But let's not just dwell on the grime under your fingernails and the bread in your belly. The medieval watchman's life was also overshadowed by the looming spectre of politics. Yet behind those city walls, there was a whole chess game of power plays happening. And guess what? You were the pawn. Picture this. It's the 14th century, and Europe's political scene is more tangled than a medieval maiden's hair after a windy day. Local lords, kings, and the occasional ambitious bishop are all jostling for control, and their power struggles have a nasty habit of trickling down to folks like you. One day, you're loyal to the local baron who's been in charge since your grandpappy was knee-high to a grasshopper. The next, the king decides he's had enough of said baron's independent streak and sends in his troops. Congratulations. You've just been drafted into a game of who's my boss today. Let's face it, your allegiance was a bit like medieval fashion, subject to sudden and unpredictable changes. Take the case of England's King Edward Roman III and his infamous 100 Years' War with France. With allegiances flipping faster than pancakes at a medieval fair, a watchman had to keep his ear to the ground, or risk losing his head. Literally. If your city was suddenly under the thumb of a new lord, you better be ready to pledge loyalty faster than you can say. Feudal hierarchy. And speaking of hierarchy, the medieval power structure was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. A local lord might be your boss on Monday, but by Friday he could be fleeing the wrath of a rival noble. The city of Florence in the 15th century saw power change hands so often it was like a medieval game of musical chairs. As a watchman, your job was to stay vigilant, regardless of whose flag flew over the city gates. It was a precarious balancing act, like walking a tightrope with the added pressure of avoiding both literal and metaphorical daggers. The political landscape wasn't just a matter of who sat on the throne, either. It was a web of alliances, marriages, and betrayals. Lords and kings were constantly signing treaties with one hand and crossing their fingers behind their backs with the other. The Treaty of Troyes in 1420, for instance, was supposed to end hostilities between England and France by marrying off Henry V to the French Princess Catherine. But like a bad soap opera, it only led to more drama. For the humble Watchman, this meant keeping an eye out for anything from a full-scale invasion to a secret nighttime skirmish. These political machinations also meant that Watchmen often found themselves in the crossfire, quite literally. Take the tale of the Siege of Orleans during the 100 Years' War. Jean de Dunois, the so-called Bastard of Orleans, led a campaign to relieve the besieged city. For the watchmen on the city walls, this meant facing the very real threat of English arrows while trying to keep things from spiraling into chaos within the city. Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place. And then there's the matter of trust, or the lack thereof. In a world where betrayal was as common as fleas on a stray dog, trust was a luxury few could afford. Your loyalty as a watchman was constantly questioned, especially if you hailed from a different region or had family ties to a rival faction. It wasn't uncommon for watchmen to be seen as potential turncoats, leading to a plethora of precautionary measures. In some cases, cities even installed multiple watchmen from different factions, ensuring that no single group could seize control without the others knowing. This climate of suspicion wasn't just a local phenomenon. On a broader scale, the shifting allegiances in the Holy Roman Empire could leave even the most seasoned watchman scratching his head. With over 300 semi-independent entities within the empire, each with its own agenda, loyalty was about as stable as a teetering pile of Jenga blocks. One infamous incident occurred in 1346, when Emperor Louis Roman IV found himself at odds with the papacy, leading to a papal-backed rival being elected as king. For a watchman in one of the empire's many cities, this meant navigating a political minefield where any misstep could have dire consequences. So there you have it. The life of a medieval watchman wasn't just about braving the elements or fending off thieves. It was a constant dance with danger, dictated by the ever-changing whims of those in power. Sure, there's a certain romance to the idea of standing watch over a medieval city, but the reality, it was a pressure cooker of political intrigue, where one wrong move could turn you from a trusted guardian to a wanted fugitive. But let's not end on a somber note. After all, there's a certain poetic irony to the fact that while kings and lords played their high-stakes games, it was the lowly watchmen who truly held the keys to the city. They were the unsung sentinels, the silent protectors who, despite the chaos and uncertainty of their world, stood resolute. And while they might not have worn crowns or wielded scepters, their duty was no less noble. So the next time you're feeling bogged down by office politics, just remember, you're not alone. You're part of a long, storied tradition of navigating the murky waters of power and allegiance, one precarious step at a time. So you've got kings and lords playing their high-stakes games, but let's not forget about the legends. Oh, the tales they spun about the noble watchman. Picture it, a lone sentinel standing stoic against the night, a silent protector with the heart of a lion and the eyes of a hawk. This enduring image has all the makings of a blockbuster movie. You know, the kind where the hero saves the day and gets the girl. But let's not put the medieval cart before the horse. The reality was a bit more whoops, there goes the horse, than heroic gallantry. Back in the day, these myths served a purpose. They were like the medieval version of a motivational poster you'd hang in the break room, except instead of hang in there with a cute kitten, it was stand strong with a grim-faced watchman. Cities needed their citizens to feel safe and their watchmen to feel proud, or at least less inclined to bolt at the first sign of trouble. So, tales of valiant watchmen were circulated to boost morale and remind everyone that, yes, someone was keeping an eye on things, even if that someone was more likely to trip over a stray cat than catch a criminal mastermind. Take, for instance, the story of the watchman who single-handedly saved the city of Winchester from Viking invaders. Legend has it, he spotted the enemy fleet and raised the alarm just in time. But if we dig a little deeper, what do we find? Primary sources hint that the fleet was likely a couple of boats, and the alarm was more like a frantic yelling fit that startled half the town awake. Yet the story stuck because who doesn't love a good underdog tale? It was a morale booster, a way to say, hey, we've got this, even if we're just winging it. These legends were designed to give the impression that the city was always under vigilant guard, even if the reality was that the watchman was probably dozing off during the third hour of his shift. After all, we're talking about 10-12-hour stretches of staring into the abyss, hoping nothing stares back. Let's be honest, after a few hours, even the most dedicated guardian starts seeing shadowy figures where there are none. And here's the kicker. These myths have outlived the watchmen themselves, perpetuated by centuries of retellings, and more recently, by Hollywood's penchant for medieval drama. Modern media loves to glamorize the past, portraying watchmen as unsung heroes rather than the under-equipped, underpaid sentinels they were. It's the same reason every medieval movie features knights in shining armor, despite the fact that most knights probably looked like they'd just been through a tornado. The truth is a bit grimier, but far less marketable. Consider the famous Night Watch by Rembrandt. While it's a stunning piece of art, it's a romanticized depiction of civic guardsmen, not unlike our medieval watchmen. The painting shows them as noble figures, ready for action. But in reality, these guys were more like a neighborhood watch group, with a little less action and a lot more standing around. Rembrandt captured the myth, not the mundane reality of nightly patrols and grumbling stomachs. The myth of the noble watchman also served a political purpose. By elevating the watchman's role, rulers could reinforce the idea that their city was a fortress of safety and order, even if it was more like a leaky sieve. It was a way of maintaining control, ensuring the populace felt secure enough to pay their taxes and not, say, revolt because they were tired of living in a tinderbox. The romantic appeal of these stories is undeniable. Who wouldn't want to be remembered as a hero rather than a hapless guard hoping the night would pass without incident? But these myths gloss over the very real dangers watchmen faced. In the records of medieval cities, like London and Paris, you'll find entries about watchmen injured or killed on duty, often during routine patrols that turned unexpectedly violent. And let's not forget about the weather. Ever try standing guard during a medieval winter? It's like volunteering to be a human icicle. Yet the legends conveniently skip over these hardships, focusing instead on bravery and vigilance. It's the kind of selective storytelling that makes for good legends but lousy history. In the end, the myth of the noble watchman is just that, a myth. It's a comforting story to tell ourselves, a way to impose order on a past that was anything but orderly. But by peeling back the layers, we see a more nuanced picture. A world where watchmen played a vital role, yes, but one fraught with challenges and far from the romanticized tales of yore. So the next time you hear about the brave medieval watchman, remember that behind every legend is a human being just trying to make it through the night. The romantic appeal of these stories might offer a comforting narrative, but the reality was as gritty as the cobblestones they patrolled. And while myths have their place, it's the untold stories of endurance and resilience that truly shape history. Keep that in mind as we delve deeper into the life of the medieval watchman and uncover more truths lurking beneath the surface. But let's not forget, behind every legend of a valiant watchman lies a truth more mundane but equally vital. These guys were the backbone of medieval urban life, the duct tape holding society together. Sure, they weren't saving cities from Viking hordes on a daily basis, but they were doing something arguably just as important, keeping order in a world where chaos was always a stone's throw away. So, let's take a step back and appreciate the unsung influence of the medieval watchman, which, believe it or not, still echoes in our modern world. Picture medieval cities like bustling anthills, teeming with activity and potential for disorder. Watchmen were the ants with the thankless task of keeping the peace amidst the chaos. They were the original neighborhood watch, the ones who made sure your medieval version of Uber Eats arrived safely. Without them, the city would have been a free-for-all, with every thief, cutpurse, and mischief-maker running wild. And let's be clear, medieval cities were not the serene, quaint hamlets we sometimes imagine. They were more like powder kegs, ready to explode at any moment with a riot, a fire, or a good old-fashioned witch hunt. The watchman's role was to act as a deterrent, a reminder that someone was watching. It's a lesson in human nature. People behave better when they know they are being observed. This principle underlies much of modern policing, from CCTV cameras to neighborhood patrols. Back then, the The watchman's mere presence could prevent a brawl from breaking out or a shop from being looted. It's not glamorous work, but it's the kind of quiet, effective policing that keeps a society from crumbling. Now, medieval cities might not have had the crime statistics we rely on today, but they did have records of disturbances, and the watchmen were frequently called upon to restore order. Take, for instance, London in the 14th century, where records show that disturbances were as common as rain in England. The city relied heavily on its watchmen to keep the peace, especially during festivals and market days when the potential for rowdiness was at its peak. It was a job that required more than just muscle. It demanded a certain level of diplomacy, too. Sometimes, calming a crowd meant knowing when to wield your club and when to simply talk someone down. Over time, the evolution of city defenses and the role of the watchman paved the way for more organized forms of policing. Fast forward a few hundred years, and you get the Bow Street Runners in 18th century London, often considered the first professional police force. They were the spiritual successors of the medieval watchmen, albeit with a bit more structure and less reliance on bread as compensation. The Bow Street Runners were paid in coin, not carbs, and operated under a centralized system that allowed for better coordination and accountability. Watchman's legacy is evident in the very fabric of modern law enforcement. The concept of a night watch has evolved into the 24/7 policing model we see today, where officers patrol streets around the clock. Modern police forces also draw heavily on the watchman's role in community engagement. The idea that law enforcement is most effective when it's part of the community rather than an external force is a direct descendant of the watchman's work. They were, after all, locals who knew the people they were policing, which is something modern community policing aims to replicate. It's crucial to recognize the harsh realities behind the romanticized tales, not just because they make for a more accurate history lesson, but because they remind us of the resilience of ordinary people. The watchmen were not knights in shining armor, but their work was no less vital. They dealt with the muck and the mire, the cold and the chaos, all in service of creating a semblance of order. Their story is not one of glory and glamour, but of grit and perseverance. And isn't that often the more compelling narrative? The idea that history is shaped not just by the grand gestures of great men, but by the everyday actions of unsung heroes. So next time you're walking down a well-lit street, maybe spare a thought for those medieval watchmen, trudging through the dark with little more than a flickering lantern and a lot of hope. They might not have made the history books, but their legacy is written in every safe street and every peaceful night. And as we continue to debate the role of policing in modern society, perhaps we can learn from the watchman's blend of vigilance and humanity. In conclusion, the life of a medieval watchman was far from the romanticized legend, yet their contribution was crucial in maintaining the precarious balance of order and chaos. They were the silent sentinels who patrolled the night, not for riches or glory, but for the simple, yet profound, mission of keeping their communities safe. Their legacy is the foundation upon which modern policing stands, a testament to the enduring impact of those who labor in the shadows, ensuring that others may sleep soundly. It's a lesson in humility and persistence, a reminder that history isn't just the tale of kings and conquests, but also of those who worked tirelessly in the background. So, the next time you're safe at home, think of the medieval watchmen and their nightly patrols. In the end, it wasn't just about keeping watch. It was about keeping hope alive in a world that often teetered on the brink of darkness. In the world of World War II, hygiene was less about luxury and more about a grim game of survival. Picture this: soldiers crammed in trenches that were more mud bath than battle line, where the idea of a daily shower was as mythical as unicorns. With an environment like that, it's no surprise that the soldiers' greatest allies were soap and a strong stomach. They were up against lice, fleas, and trench foot, a trifecta of torment that could make even the bravest soldier shudder. Now, you might think of war as a grand strategic chess game, but for these guys, it was more like a grimy game of dodgeball where the ball was a louse with a vengeance. The truth is, personal space was as scarce as a good meal, and every day was a battle against the tiny invaders lurking in their uniforms. Lice didn't discriminate. Their favorite hangout was the seams of clothing, and they had a knack for making soldiers as itchy as a wool sweater in July. The soldiers had to get creative, using anything from kerosene to DDT, a pesticide that was as potent as it was risky, to keep the pests at bay. Talk about desperate times calling for desperate measures. And then there was trench foot, the foot ailment from hell. Imagine standing in waterlogged boots for days on end, your feet slowly turning into something that belongs in a horror film. Trench foot was the war's unwelcome guest, a condition that caused swelling, numbness, and in worst-case scenarios, gangrene. The solution was as simple as it was elusive: dry socks and foot powder. But when you're knee-deep in mud and misery, swapping socks isn't exactly on your priority list. The communal latrines were a whole other level of unpleasantness. Forget the privacy of a modern bathroom. These were hastily dug pits that turned into breeding grounds for everything nasty. Soldiers had to master the art of balancing over these pits, all while trying to ignore the olfactory assault. It was a grim reminder that even the most basic human needs could become a test of endurance. Showers were rare, a luxury reserved for those few and far between moments when the stars aligned just right. Instead, soldiers resorted to sponge baths or a quick dousing with whatever water was available, even if it meant braving the icy chill of a winter river. It's no wonder that a clean uniform and a fresh shave could feel like $1 million makeover. Despite these challenges, soldiers were nothing if not resourceful. They turned to the military's version of Pinterest hacks, using cigarette butts to repel bugs, or creating makeshift washing stations with empty cans and a bit of ingenuity. The ability to adapt and improvise was as crucial as any weapon in their arsenal. But let's not romanticize the grit and grime too much. The reality was harsh, and these conditions took a toll on morale and health. Illnesses spread like gossip at a high school reunion, and maintaining even a semblance of hygiene could mean the difference between life and death. It was a dirty, thankless job, but one that was crucial to the war effort. In the grand tapestry of World War II, hygiene might seem like a footnote, but it was a thread that held the fabric of the front lines together. Behind every heroic tale of bravery and sacrifice, there lurked the less glamorous, often overlooked struggle against the filth and discomfort that came with the territory. So next time you hear stories of valor and victory, spare a thought for the unsung battle against the bugs, the muck, and the relentless march of trench foot. Because sometimes the toughest battles were the ones fought in the quiet moments, with nothing more than a bar of soap and a prayer. While soldiers were getting cozy with lice and trench foot, the folks back home were wrestling with their own hygiene hurdles. You see, World War II wasn't just fought on battlefields. It was waged in kitchens and bathrooms, too. Civilians were drafted into a different kind of war effort, one where the enemy was grime, and the weapons were rationed bars of soap and buckets of cold water. Talk about a real-life soap opera. Imagine the average household in 1940s Britain or the United States. Picture a calendar with national holidays marked not by festive celebrations, but by scheduled bath days. Soap, once an everyday commodity, was now a precious resource. Thanks to rationing, families received a measly allowance, often just 1 or 2 bars per month. To put it in perspective, that's like trying to clean your entire house with a single sponge. And oh, did I mention the water shortages? You'd be lucky to fill half a tub, let alone indulge in a luxurious soap. But here's the kicker. The government wasn't content with just rationing supplies. They want to turn the mundane act of cleaning into a patriotic duty. Enter the Cleanliness is Next to Godliness campaign, rebranded as Scrub for Victory. It was like joining the Hygiene army, where every scrub and polish was a blow against the Axis powers. Propaganda posters popped up everywhere, urging citizens to clean their homes as meticulously as a general inspects his troops. It was all part of the effort to boost morale and keep spirits high, even if it meant fighting dirt with a stiff upper lip and a well-used washcloth. Now, let's dig into some of those bizarre, yet oddly ingenious hygiene hacks that emerged from the home front. When faced with soap shortages, people got creative. Housewives turned to homemade concoctions like soap made from animal fats and lye, a delightful chemistry experiment that could easily double as a hazardous materials lesson. And when soap wasn't an option, a little baking soda and elbow grease went a long way. Deodorant, forget it. A sprinkle of talcum powder was the closest thing to a fresh scent. And let's not forget about washing clothes. With laundry soap in short supply, folks resorted to boiling their linens with soda crystals or even using grated potato as a detergent substitute. Yes, you heard that right. Potatoes weren't just for dinner. They were in your wash cycle too. When it came to drying, the sun was your best friend, and a stiff breeze was practically divine intervention. One of the more curious trends was the rise of the victory bath. With water conservation in full swing, families implemented a system where everyone bathed in the same tub of water, one after the other. It was a bit like a very unglamorous spa day, except instead of relaxing, you were trying to ignore the grimy water and your siblings' dirt floating around. Sharing might be caring, but in this case, it was more about necessity. These practices, bizarre as they might sound to us now, were a testament to human ingenuity in the face of adversity. They also laid the groundwork for a cultural shift toward resourcefulness and thriftiness that lingered long after the war ended. The mantra of make, do, and mend became a way of life, influencing everything from fashion to home economics. As the war raged on, these hygiene habits became ingrained in the societal fabric. The British Ministry of Information even launched campaigns to encourage these practices as a form of resilience. It was like a nationwide pep talk, minus the cheerleaders, reminding everyone that their everyday actions were as vital to the war effort as the soldiers' bravery on the front lines. This wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about maintaining dignity and morale in the face of deprivation. The economic context further fueled these practices. The war had redirected resources to the military, causing shortages in civilian markets. In the U.S., soap production dropped by nearly 30% during the war years, and in Britain, the government regulated the manufacturing and distribution of cleaning supplies. Suddenly, cleanliness wasn't just a matter of hygiene. It was a matter of national security. But let's not sugarcoat it. There were plenty of grumbles and groans. Not everyone was thrilled about sharing bathwater or turning potatoes into cleaning agents. The romanticized notion of communal sacrifice often glossed over the very real frustrations and inconveniences people faced. Yet, in the grand scheme of things, these efforts were a small price to pay for the greater good. The legacy of these wartime hygiene practices continued to ripple through post-war society. The waste not, want not mentality persisted into the 1950 and beyond, shaping consumer habits and attitudes toward conservation. People emerged from the war with a newfound appreciation for the little luxuries in life, like a hot bath or a fresh bar of soap. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, a little bit of resourcefulness and a lot of scrubbing could go a long way. Now, you might hear these stories and think they sound like something out of a quirky historical sitcom. But make no mistake, they were a crucial part of the home front's contribution to the war effort. The ingenuity and resilience displayed by civilians during World War II were as vital to the ultimate victory as any battle fought overseas. So next time you enjoy a long, hot shower, spare a thought for those who fought their own war against dirt and grime, armed with little more than a bar of soap and a whole lot of determination. Because sometimes the toughest battles are the ones fought on the home front, with nothing more than a shared tub of water and a pinch of humor. Now, if you think the home front was a hygiene roller coaster, just wait until we dive into the trenches of medical history during World War II. We're talking about an era where a soldier's greatest enemy wasn't always the guy on the other side of no man's land. Sometimes it was the microscopic menaces lurking in their own camps. Dysentery, typhus, and a whole host of other delightful diseases were as much a part of the daily drill as marching and maneuvers. Forget about dodging bullets. Dodging bacteria was the real survival skill. Let's start with dysentery, a condition that sounds almost as unpleasant as it is. Imagine being stuck on the front lines with a persistent case of the runs. Not exactly the glamorous wartime image Hollywood likes to sell, right? But during WWII, dysentery was like that uninvited party guest who just wouldn't leave. It hitched a ride with soldiers from the jungles of the Pacific to the deserts of North Africa, turning entire units into unwilling marathon runners to the nearest latrine. The numbers are staggering. In the Pacific Theater alone, nearly 30% of troops were affected at some point, which is a statistic no one was rushing to boast about. Of course, the military medics had their work cut out for them. In an age before widespread antibiotics, treating these ailments was a bit like trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose. They had some tricks up their sleeves, though. One of the more inventive methods was the use of sulfur drugs, the first real antibiotics. These were the medical equivalent of bringing a knife to a gunfight. Better than nothing, but hardly decisive. The results were mixed. Sulfur could stave off a full-blown infection, but it wasn't a miracle cure. And let's not gloss over typhus, a disease that had been the scourge of armies since at least Napoleon's time. Transmitted by lice, it was a perfect storm of misery in the cramped, dirty conditions of wartime. The symptoms: fever, chills, and a rash that made a sunburn look like a minor inconvenience. During WWII, typhus was particularly rampant on the Eastern Front, where it decimated both Axis and Soviet troops. The numbers were grim. In 1942 alone, over 100,000 cases were reported in the Soviet Union, with a mortality rate that could reach 40%. Enter the medics, who were tasked with not only treating infected soldiers, but also preventing outbreaks in the first place. Their arsenal included DDT, which was hailed as a wonder chemical for its ability to annihilate lice populations with ruthless efficiency. It might have been effective, but let's just say the long-term health effects weren't exactly covered in the brochures. Still, desperate times called for desperate measures, and DDT was sprayed liberally, coating everything from barracks to bedding in a fine, toxic dust. It was a quick fix, but one that left a legacy still debated today. The hygiene challenges didn't just stop at diseases. The psychological toll was immense. Imagine being a young soldier, far from home, and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while constantly feeling like a walking petri dish. Morale was as much about mental health as physical, and the army knew it. They implemented regular inspections, not just for military readiness, but for cleanliness too. A clean soldier was a healthy soldier, after all, or so the theory went. But maintaining hygiene wasn't just about regulations. It was about survival. Soldiers resorted to all sorts of DIY solutions to keep the bugs at bay. From makeshift showers rigged from petrol cans to using any available alcohol-based liquid as a hand sanitizer, the ingenuity was as impressive as it was necessary. These makeshift solutions were sometimes the only thing standing between the troops and a debilitating illness. The impact on troop morale can't be overstated. Poor hygiene wasn't just a health risk. It was a constant, gnawing source of discomfort that could sap the fighting spirit faster than any enemy fire. The military tried to address this with morale-boosting initiatives, including hygiene kits that were distributed to soldiers. These kits were the wartime equivalent of a care package, complete with toothbrushes, shaving gear, and that precious commodity, soap. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline to a world that felt increasingly distant. Despite these efforts, the harsh reality was that for many soldiers, hygiene was a losing battle. The conditions they faced were a stark reminder that in the grand theater of war, the stage wasn't just set with tanks and planes, but with germs and grime. Every trench was a microcosm of the greater conflict, where the fight against dirt and disease was as relentless as any military campaign. So, while the history books might focus on the grand strategies and epic battles, it's worth remembering that the war was also won and lost in the small, everyday skirmishes against the tiny foes that made life on the front lines a veritable nightmare. It was a lesson in endurance, innovation, and the relentless drive to maintain one's humanity amidst the chaos. Next time you hear about the heroic efforts of medics on the battlefield, spare a thought for their less heralded, but equally important, war against the invisible enemies of disease and despair. Because in the world of WWII, sometimes the most heroic battles were fought not with guns and grenades, but with a bottle of sulfur and a prayer for a clean pair of socks. Stay tuned for the next chapter of this unvarnished look at WWII hygiene. From the medical marvels to the grim realities, we've still got plenty of ground to cover. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming up next. As we wade deeper into the murky waters of WWII hygiene, let's talk about the PR wizardry that tried to turn the gritty reality of soldier life into a palatable, almost romantic narrative. It's like trying to convince someone that camping in a swamp is a luxurious spa retreat, ambitious, but a bit of a stretch. Now, the folks behind wartime propaganda weren't naive. They knew that the truth about life on the front lines, mud, lice, and all, wasn't exactly the stuff of morale-boosting legends. So, they spun tales that glossed over the grimy details and highlighted the nobility of the soldier's struggle. Think of it as the original Instagram filter, all sepia-toned heroism with a side of strategic omission. Enter the government-issued hygiene manuals, which were less about reality and more about encouraging soldiers to embrace a hygienic fantasyland. These guides painted a picture of soldiers as paragons of cleanliness, suggesting that regular bathing and fresh clothing were not only possible but routine. Never mind the fact that water was scarcer than a good night's sleep in a foxhole, and clean clothes were about as easy to come by as a unicorn. The manuals were ambitious, with detailed instructions on everything from proper shaving techniques to the ideal method for airing out uniforms to prevent the dreaded trench stench. They read like a cross between a survival guide and a self-help book, with a pinch of wishful thinking. The idea was to instill discipline and boost morale, but it also set a standard that was, frankly, a tad optimistic. But the real magic happened in the world of morale-boosting posters. These pieces of propaganda were the memes of their day, plastered on every available surface, reminding soldiers and civilians alike that hygiene was their patriotic duty. Picture a burly soldier, shirtless and grinning, lathered up in a makeshift shower, with a slogan like "Wash for Victory." It was the kind of imagery that might inspire a chuckle today, but it served a serious purpose back then, keeping spirits high and reminding everyone that hygiene was a battle in its own right. Yet, behind these polished images, the reality was far from glamorous. Take the story of Private Joe "Dirt" Dawson, who recalled his time in the Italian campaign in a letter to his family. "The posters say we're clean as a whistle," he wrote, "but out here, I'm more like a muddy trumpet." His words cut through the sanitized spin, revealing the harsh truth that no amount of propaganda could fully hide. War was dirty, and so were its soldiers. Still, the allure of these romanticized images was hard to resist. They offered a comforting illusion, a narrative that transformed the mundane struggle against filth into a noble endeavor. For the folks back home, these posters were a reassurance that their loved ones were maintaining dignity in the face of adversity, even if the reality was more along the lines of smell like victory. Propaganda wasn't just about boosting morale, though. It was also an economic tool, subtly encouraging thrift and resourcefulness. By promoting the idea that cleanliness was next to godliness and patriotism, governments could justify the rationing of soap and other essentials. If every bucket of water and bar of soap was a weapon against the Axis powers, then citizens were more likely to buy into the scarcity narrative. But let's not forget that propaganda is a double-edged sword. While it can uplift and unify, it can also obscure and mislead. The sanitized images of soldier life created expectations that were often impossible to meet. For returning veterans, the contrast between the poster-perfect soldier and the reality of their experience could be jarring. It was a reminder that the battles they fought weren't just against a human enemy, but against the myths and misconceptions that surrounded them. Despite the polished veneer, the stories from the front lines tell a different tale. Soldiers like Corporal Sam Jenkins recounted in his diary how, after weeks without a proper wash, the arrival of a mobile bath unit felt like Christmas in the trenches. The unit, a converted truck with makeshift showers, was a rare luxury that offered a brief escape from the grime. "It's not the posters that keep us going," Jenkins wrote. "It's these small mercies." And then there were the hygiene kits, those little parcels of hope that promised a slice of normalcy in a world turned upside down. While the posters might have depicted them as a soldier's secret weapon, the reality was more mundane. With their basic supplies, soap, razor, toothbrush, they were neither glamorous nor comprehensive, but they were a lifeline. In a world where personal space was a distant memory, these kits were a soldier's connection to their pre-war selves. The contrast between the romanticized images and the gritty reality wasn't just a wartime phenomenon. It was a reflection of human nature. We crave stories that uplift and inspire, even when they gloss over the uncomfortable truths. The wartime propaganda machine knew this, and it played to those desires with all the finesse of a master storyteller. But for those on the ground, the truth was a different story. It was a tale of resilience in the face of relentless discomfort, of finding humor in the absurdity of it all. The posters might have shown soldiers as clean-cut and combat-ready, But the reality was a little less polished, more muddy boots and makeshift showers, less Hollywood heroism. As we wrap up this exploration of wartime spin, let's not lose sight of the bigger picture. The stories of soldiers like Dawson and Jenkins remind us that the fight against dirt and disease was as much a part of their experience as any military engagement. And while the propaganda might have painted a rosier picture, the real story was one of human ingenuity and endurance. So next time you come across those vintage wartime posters, take a moment to appreciate the artistry and the aspiration behind them, but also remember the soldiers who lived through the reality they so neatly packaged. Because in the end, their stories are the ones that truly capture the spirit of the era, a blend of grit, grime, and a determination to find humor and hope in the darkest of times. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tangled web of WWII history. The next chapter promises more revelations, more stories, and yes, more surprises about the unsung battles that shaped the course of the war. You won't want to miss it. But let's peel back the layers of wartime propaganda and step into the post-war period, where the echoes of WWII hygiene practices didn't just fade away. They reverberated across societies like the aftershocks of a seismic event. You see, the war didn't just end. It left a legacy that seeped into the very fabric of everyday life, altering public health policies and personal hygiene habits like the plot twist no one saw coming. First, let's talk about the public health policies that underwent a metamorphosis thanks to wartime lessons. The brutal realities of battlefield hygiene forced governments to recognize the vital importance of public health infrastructure. After witnessing the havoc that poor sanitation could wreak on army camps, countries like the United States and the United Kingdom invested heavily in public health initiatives. They weren't just building bridges and roads in the post-war boom. They were laying the foundations for modern sanitation systems. Imagine this. By 1950, the U.S. public health expenditure had increased by a whopping 50% compared to the pre-war period. That's like upgrading from a dial-up connection to fiber optics overnight. And it wasn't just about the money. The war spurred innovations that became the bedrock of modern public health practices. Take DDT, for instance. Despite its eventual fall from grace due to environmental concerns, it initially revolutionized pest control. In the immediate post-war years, it was sprayed with the enthusiasm of a kid with a new toy drastically reducing mosquito-borne diseases like malaria. Even penicillin, that wonder drug born out of wartime necessity, went on to become the superhero of antibiotics, slashing mortality rates for infections that once had doctors wringing their hands in despair. Now, let's zoom in on personal hygiene habits. The war drilled a certain level of discipline and resourcefulness into the civilian psyche. The make, do, and mend mentality became an unofficial motto, surviving long after the last bomb had fallen. Families that had been rationed to 2 bars of soap a month didn't just revert to their pre-war habits overnight. Nope, they carried forward a heightened awareness of resource conservation, a mindset that would help fuel the burgeoning environmental movements of the decades to come. Think of it as a dirty little secret that turned into a badge of honor. But myths, oh, those stubborn myths, they clung on like mud on a soldier's boots. Popular culture often paints the picture of a post-war era where people emerged from the rubble, gleaming and immaculate, ready to embrace a new dawn. Yet, the truth was a little grittier. The transition wasn't immediate. It was more like an awkward adolescent phase. For many, the shortage mindset lingered, and the post-war world wasn't the soap and water utopia Hollywood might have you believe. And speaking of myths, let's debunk a few that have seeped into our collective consciousness. The notion that soldiers returned from war with impeccable hygiene habits, ready to enforce them at home, is as romantic as it is misleading. Sure, they brought back discipline, but they also brought back the reality of having survived in conditions where a daily shower was a pipe dream. For many veterans, the memories of makeshift showers and lice-infested uniforms were as hard to shake off as the grime itself. Yet the allure of these myths persists. They offer a comforting narrative, a tidy conclusion to the chaos of war. But the truth is, the post-war era was a complex tapestry of resilience and adaptation, where societies had to rebuild not just their infrastructure, but their very way of life. It was a period marked by both progress and nostalgia, a time when the lessons of war were woven into the fabric of peace. In the grand scheme of things, WWII hygiene practices were more than just a footnote in history. They were a catalyst for change. They reshaped public health priorities, influenced personal habits, and left a legacy that continues to inform how we approach sanitation and disease prevention today. The war may have been fought with tanks and planes, but its enduring impact was carried out in the small, everyday rituals of cleanliness and care. So, as we wrap up this exploration, let's not forget the unsung heroes of this narrative, the ordinary men and women who battled the unseen enemies of dirt and disease. Their stories remind us that sometimes the most significant battles are fought not in grand arenas, but in the quiet, unglamorous moments of life. And while the myths might offer a sanitized version of history, it's the gritty reality that truly captures the spirit of resilience and innovation. Here's to the soldiers who fought with soap and water, to the civilians who scrubbed for victory, and to the public health pioneers who turned wartime necessity into peacetime progress. Their legacy is a testament to the power of human ingenuity and the unyielding drive to find order amidst chaos. So, next time you wash your hands or enjoy a hot shower, spare a thought for the wartime struggles that made it all possible. Because in the end, the cleanest victories are often the hardest one. And with that, we've reached the end of our journey through the murky waters of WWII Hygiene. It's been a tale of grit and grime, of legends and realities, and I hope it leaves you with a newfound appreciation for the small, everyday battles that shape the course of history. Remember, history isn't just about the big moments. It's about the countless little ones that add up to make a difference. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and never underestimate the power of a good scrub. You wake up to the sound of roosters belting out their morning concerts, the medieval version of your smartphone alarm. The sun's barely made its entrance, but you've got a long day ahead as the village blacksmith. First things first, breakfast. Now, if you're picturing a grand feast of eggs, bacon, and a latte on the side, you're way off. Medieval breakfasts were more grab what you can than gourmet. Think porridge, maybe some bread, and if you're really lucky, a hunk of cheese. It's not about indulgence, it's about fuel. You've got to keep the fires stoked, both in your belly and at the forge. Breakfast in hand, you take a moment to consider your role in the village. You're not just some guy who bangs metal all day. You're the lifeblood of the community. Need a plowshare. Come see you. Need horseshoes. You're the Godu. And let's not forget the knights who can't do much knightly jousting without your handiwork on their swords and armor. Your work is as essential as it gets in this medieval setup. But let's bust a myth right off the bat. The idea of the lone, brooding blacksmith toiling away in isolation. That's more fantasy than fact. In reality, medieval blacksmiths often worked in bustling ateliers with apprentices, journeymen, and sometimes even family members all contributing to the metal symphony. Forge life was a communal affair, full of chatter, clanging, and the occasional argument over who left the tongs in the wrong place. It's not a solitary endeavor, it's teamwork minus the motivational posters. The day is young, and you've got a village depending on you. As you enter the workshop, let's talk economics, because money matters, even in the Middle Ages. Blacksmithing is a lucrative business. Sure, you're not rolling in gold coins like a medieval Scrooge McDuck, but you're doing all right. A good blacksmith could earn enough to live comfortably, bartering for goods, and occasionally seeing some silver. Consider this. A basic iron plough might set someone back a couple of shillings, no small change when the average labourer earned about a penny a day. You're not just making metal objects. You're crafting the very tools that keep the agrarian engine running. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer physicality of your work. Forget gym memberships. Swinging a hammer all day is a workout like no other. You're not just building muscle, you're building civilization. Every clang of the hammer against the anvil is a reminder of the sweat and skill that shapes each piece. And while the romantic image of the blacksmith might involve a lot of muscle and mystery, the reality involved a fair amount of technical skill. And yes, a bit of science too. Metallurgy, to be precise. It's time to fire up the forge, because nothing says good morning like the roar of a bellows and the glow of hot iron. As the flames rise, it's worth noting that this isn't just any fire. We're talking about temperatures upwards of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You're basically running a medieval blast furnace. And while it might seem rudimentary to modern eyes, It's cutting-edge technology for the time. As the day progresses, you'll shape everything from nails to weapons, and each piece tells a story of necessity and innovation. Remember, a simple nail might be just a nail to us, but back then, it was a prized commodity. These small, sharp bits of metal hold together the very structures that people call home. And in a world where the nearest Home Depot is several centuries away, your forge is indispensable. In this medieval world, your skills are more than just practical. They are transformative. You're not just hammering metal. You're forging connections and shaping the future. And while the romanticized version of a blacksmith might focus on the rugged individual, the truth is, you're part of a larger tapestry, with each clang of the hammer a rhythmic reminder of your integral role in village life. As you pause for a moment, taking in the sounds of the workshop, remember this. You're not just a craftsman, you're a cornerstone of history, right here in the heart of the medieval village. And with that, it's back to the grindstone, literally. The grindstone. It's not just a metaphor for hard work. It's a literal tool you'll be seeing a lot of in your mid-morning hustle. As the forge roars and the anvil rings, it's time to dive into the nitty-gritty of medieval blacksmith economics. Spoiler alert, it's not all clinking coins and treasure chests. You see, while you might be the rock star of the village economy, medieval currency wasn't exactly a Spotify paycheck. Your earnings, let's just say it's less make it rain and more make it drizzle. In a good year, a blacksmith could earn about 12 to 15 pounds sterling. For context, that's roughly 600 to 500 pennies. Not pocket change, but not exactly swimming in wealth, especially when you consider that a decent pair of shoes cost around 6 pennies. It's a living, sure, but you're not exactly retiring to a villa with a moat. And what about materials? Iron, your bread and butter, or rather, your bread and iron, was a valuable commodity. A ton of iron might cost around 5 pounds sterling. That's a hefty price tag, and you're also juggling expenses like coal for the forge and the occasional pint at the local tavern to keep your spirits high. While the modern world might balk at the idea of hauling your own supplies from the nearest market town, back then, it was just part of the gig. No Amazon Prime delivery to your door, just plenty of back-breaking labor and carefully planned trips. Speaking of trips, let's talk trade networks. Imagine a medieval web of connections, a sort of rudimentary LinkedIn, if you will. Your work wasn't just confined to the boundaries of your village. Blacksmiths often engaged in trade with neighboring towns, bartering goods and services. It wasn't uncommon for you to swap forged tools for foodstuffs or raw materials. You trade a batch of horseshoes for grain, wine, or even livestock. It's a system that relied heavily on trust and reputation. A bad deal could earn you a bad name faster than you could say, shoddy workmanship. Now, you're not just a free agent in this medieval market. Enter the guilds. Think of them as the original trade unions, but with more parchment and fewer coffee breaks. These organizations were the gatekeepers of the craft, regulating quality, prices, and even who could become a blacksmith. Joining a guild was like getting a medieval blue checkmark. It legitimized your skills and offered some protection in a world where competition could be as fierce as a jousting tournament. Guilds ensured standards were upheld, but they also had a stranglehold on prices and controlled the influx of new talent into the trade. If you were an apprentice, these guilds were your golden ticket to the world of master blacksmiths, provided you could endure years of training and the occasional hazing ritual. But let's not ignore the social standing of the blacksmith. In a world structured like a medieval social media hierarchy, you're sitting comfortably in the middle, respected, but not quite nobility. You're essential, and that's not just a flattering title, it's a fact. Your skills keep the wheels of society turning, quite literally. You're the medieval equivalent of a tech guru, the guy everyone needs, but doesn't always understand. Lords and ladies might not invite you to their banquets, but they'll certainly need you to fix their armor and tack when the tournament season rolls around. While the romantic image of the lone blacksmith tinkering away in isolation might tug at the heartstrings, reality paints a more complex picture. Your life is a delicate balance of supply and demand, skill and sweat, with a dash of political maneuvering thrown in for good measure. You're part of a system that's as intricate as the filigree on a knight's sword, with trade routes crisscrossing like medieval highways and guilds acting as both gatekeepers and guardians. And just like that, the mid-morning sun has climbed higher, casting long shadows through the workshop. As you take a moment to wipe the sweat from your brow, Remember, you're not just forging metal, you're forging a legacy. Each piece you create is a testament to your craft, a tangible link in the great chain of history. So go ahead, fire up the bellows, and let's get back to shaping the world, one clang at a time. As the afternoon sun climbs, you find yourself back at the anvil, ready to turn raw iron into something that could actually pay the bills, or at least cover your next meal. The forge is a cacophony of clanging hammers and hissing steam, like a medieval heavy metal concert without the marsh pit. You're not just a blacksmith, you're an iron alchemist, conjuring tools and weapons from the sweat of your brow and the fire at your feet. Now, let's dive into the nuts and bolts of this craft, literally. Blacksmithing is no romantic getaway, it's a sweat-soaked, muscle-burning marathon. Forget the image of a lone artisan delicately crafting each piece with finesse and poetry. In reality, it's more akin to a high-intensity workout session, complete with grunts and the occasional muttered curse when things don't go as planned. Speaking of tools, your workshop is a veritable arsenal of implements, each with its own purpose and personality. You've got your trusty hammer, the star of the show, weighing in at about 3 to 5 pounds. It's not about brute force, it's about rhythm and precision. Then there's the anvil, your constant companion, weighing anywhere from 150 to 500 pounds. This hulking beast is the solid foundation against which your creativity strikes. And don't forget the bellows, your medieval air conditioner. Although instead of cooling you down, it fans the forge flames to a toasty 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot enough to melt steel, but unfortunately not your stress. You've also got tongs in various shapes and sizes, because no one wants to handle red-hot metal with their bare hands unless they're auditioning for a medieval circus act. Let's bust another myth wide open. Blacksmiths aren't just mindlessly hammering away. There's a science to this madness, a dance with metallurgy that demands an understanding of how different metals react to heat. Iron, for instance, needs to be heated to a specific cherry red hue before it's pliable enough to shape. Too hot or too cold, and you might as well be trying to sculpt a rock with a feather. And while we're at it, let's talk about the physical toll. Your average blacksmith isn't the sculpted Adonis of romantic lore. More likely, he's built like a rugby player who moonlights as a lumberjack. Swinging that hammer all day isn't just a workout, it's an endurance test. You're burning calories like a medieval marathon runner, except your finish line is a finished piece, not a laurel wreath. But it's not just your muscles getting a workout, your mind is too. Problem solving is the name of the game, especially when a project doesn't go as planned. That sword you've been painstakingly crafting. One wrong move, and it's a glorified paperweight. Blacksmiths have to think on their feet, adapting to imperfections in the metal or changes in the client's whims. It's like being a chef, but instead of soufflés, you're making scythes. Despite the grit and grime, let's face it, there's a romantic allure to blacksmithing that's hard to shake off. The idea of creating something tangible and lasting with your hands is undeniably appealing. Yet this isn't the Renaissance fair, folks. It's a hard-knock life, where your creations might end up in a farmer's field or a battlefield, not a museum display. And while we're debunking myths, let's address the notion that blacksmiths were isolated from society, hammering away in solitary splendor. In truth, blacksmiths were as plugged into the community as your local barista, minus the latte art. Your forge was a hub of activity, a place where villagers might gather to chat, trade gossip, or just watch you work. Because who needs Netflix when you've got a live demonstration of medieval craftsmanship? Now, let's not forget the economics of the situation. You're not pounding iron purely for the love of the craft. Each clang of the hammer is a step closer to getting paid, whether in silver coins or barter goods. A plowshare could fetch you a couple of shillings, while a finely crafted sword might bring in up to 20 shillings. It's not exactly the jackpot, but it's enough to keep you in ale and bread, with maybe a new tunic thrown in for good measure. So, while the romantic vision of the lone blacksmith toiling in artistic solitude might tug at the heartstrings, the truth is a bit more down to earth. You're a craftsman, a technician, and a bit of a hustler, all rolled into one. Your work is vital, your skills respected, and your days are filled with the relentless rhythm of metal shaping metal. It's a world where sweat and skill forge not just tools and weapons, but the very fabric of medieval life. And as the afternoon sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows in your workshop, remember this. Each piece you create is a testament to your craft, a tangible link in the great chain of history. So go ahead, keep that hammer swinging and the forge roaring. You're not just shaping iron, you're shaping the world, one clang at a time. As the twilight begins its gentle descent, painting the sky with shades of medieval Instagram filter, you pause to consider a blacksmith's unexpected role in the grand chessboard of politics and power. Let's face it, blacksmiths weren't just metal artisans. They were the unsung architects of warfare, the backstage crew to history's most dramatic battles. Without them, knights would be swinging sticks in their designer pajamas rather than gleaming swords in full armor. So, let's dive into the political implications of your craft, because in the medieval world, iron wasn't just a material, it was a statement. You're well aware that in the high-stakes game of medieval warfare, weapons and armor were your main ticket to influence. A blacksmith's skill could turn the tide of a battle, and by extension, political fortunes. Imagine this. Your forge, a seemingly humble workshop, is essentially a weapons factory. That sword you're hammering out, it's more than just a piece of sharpened metal. It's a tool of power, a symbol of status. Kings and lords relied on blacksmiths to equip their armies, and a well-crafted sword or suit of armor could be the difference between victory and defeat. Your work was literally life and death, no pressure, right? But let's bust a myth right here. The notion that every blacksmith was a master armorer, crafting Excalibur-like swords and shining suits of armor. That's more fairy tale than fact. Only a select few, often working for the royal armory or a powerful lord, had the resources and skills to produce high-quality weaponry. The rest were busy with mundane, yet essential items, nails, axes, and plowshares. Yet even these humble tools played their own strategic roles in feudal economies and conflicts. Now, here's where it gets political. Blacksmiths held a unique position that allowed them to wield influence in local politics. In times of conflict, your ability to supply weapons made you a highly sought-after ally. Lords and knights weren't just buying metalwork, they were buying loyalty and support. And if you think about it, this was your medieval version of a political endorsement. Your forge was the CNN of the day, providing not just tools of war, but also information and gossip. Who else had the ear of both the peasantry and the nobility? But with great power comes great suspicion. While you were a valued artisan, you were also seen as a potential troublemaker. Imagine being the medieval equivalent of a tech giant, indispensable yet often distrusted. The ability to arm a militia or disrupt the local power dynamic made blacksmiths both feared and revered. It wasn't unheard of for blacksmiths to be accused of conspiring with rebels or other unsavory elements. After all, if you could produce the weapons, you had the means to fuel a rebellion. The noble class was wary of anyone who could upset the status quo, and blacksmiths fit that bill perfectly. So, you had to tread carefully, balancing your role as a craftsman with the delicate art of medieval diplomacy. You might find yourself aligning with powerful patrons to secure protection and resources. It was a tightrope walk, ensuring you didn't upset the wrong people while making sure your bellows stayed well fanned. The lord might not invite you to his table, but he'd make sure your forge was well supplied, a silent acknowledgement of your influence. Let's not forget the economic implications of your work. The armor and weapons you crafted weren't just tools of war, they were also significant investments. A single suit of armor could cost a small fortune, equivalent to several months of a knight's wages. This wasn't just a purchase, it was an economic statement. Even the most cash-strapped noble would find a way to finance a new set of chainmail, perhaps trading land or livestock, because in a world where might often made right, being well-armed was as crucial as having a good lawyer today. And while we're at it, let's talk about the guilds again, those medieval mavens of regulation. Blacksmiths who specialized in weapons were part of exclusive guilds that ensured standards were met and prices controlled. These guilds wielded considerable power, dictating who could and couldn't craft weapons, much like a medieval version of quality assurance. They acted as a buffer between blacksmiths and the political powers, providing a layer of protection and legitimacy. But here's the kicker. While guilds and patrons provided a degree of stability, they also stifled innovation. The guilds were conservative, resistant to change, and new techniques or inventions were often met with skepticism. You had to navigate this landscape carefully, balancing innovation with tradition, all while ensuring you didn't ruffle too many feathers. As the shadows lengthen, and the forge's glow becomes more pronounced. Consider this. Every clang of your hammer is a political act, a statement of power and influence in a world where metal was king. You're not just a blacksmith. You're a linchpin in the grand tapestry of medieval politics, a craftsman whose work could alter the fate of kingdoms. And while the romantic image of the solitary blacksmith persists, the reality is far more complex. You're a craftsman, a diplomat, and occasionally a political player, all rolled into one. So, keep that anvil ringing and the sparks flying. As the day winds down, remember that your forge is more than just a workshop. It's a crucible of power, a place where the echoes of your hammer resonate with the pulse of history. You're shaping not just metal, but the very fate of nations, one strike at a time. As the final sparks of the day flicker out and the forge cools, you take a moment to reflect on the legacy of blacksmiths in the grand tapestry of history. You see, blacksmiths were the original disruptors, the medieval tech geeks who laid the groundwork for the technological advancements that would shape the future. They were the unsung heroes of innovation, hammering out the tools and techniques that would eventually fuel the engines of progress. In the Middle Ages, blacksmiths were the backbone of technological society. They didn't just forge metal, they forged the future. The very concept of metallurgy, the science of manipulating metal, propelled by their hands. Techniques like tempering and alloying, mixing metals to create stronger, more resilient materials, were honed in the heat of the forge. These methods were the precursors to modern materials science, the hidden alchemy behind everything from skyscrapers to smartphones. And while the blacksmiths of old might not have been able to fathom a world of steel and microchips, their innovations set the stage for just such a reality. But let's fast forward a bit, because while blacksmiths were busy laying the groundwork for future tech, something else was brewing on the horizon, the Industrial Revolution. Picture the late 18th century, when steam engines rumbled onto the scene like a dramatic plot twist. The invention of the steam hammer in 1842 by James Nasmyth was a game changer, taking metalworking from artisanal craft to industrial powerhouse. Suddenly, what took a blacksmith hours could be done in minutes. It was like upgrading from dial-up to fiber optic, and the effects were just as transformative. And here's the kicker. While the rise of industrialization might sound like the death knell for traditional blacksmiths, it wasn't an immediate extinction event. Many blacksmiths adapted, becoming machine operators or transitioning to other trades. The local village blacksmith didn't vanish overnight. Instead, they evolved, finding new niches in a rapidly changing world. Horseshoes might have been replaced by machined parts, but the need for skilled metalworkers never truly disappeared. Yet, let's be real. Industrialization fundamentally changed the game. The romantic image of the lone blacksmith hammering away in a dusty workshop was supplanted by the sight of bustling factories and assembly lines. Mass production took over, and the bespoke craftsmanship of the blacksmith became a niche rather than the norm. But even as the traditional role of blacksmiths diminished, their legacy endured in the very fabric of industrial society. They were the OGs of metal, their techniques and innovations forming the bedrock of modern engineering. Now, let's bust a few lingering myths, because who doesn't love a good debunking session? First up, the notion that blacksmiths were the isolated geniuses of the medieval world. In reality, they were more like the social butterflies of the village, constantly engaging with customers, traders, and fellow craftspeople. Their workshops were community hubs where news was exchanged as readily as goods. If you want to know the latest village gossip or the price of grain, the forge was the place to be. And speaking of myths, let's tackle the idea that blacksmiths only made weapons and armor. Sure, those were the glamorous gigs, but the bulk of a blacksmith's work was far more mundane. Think agricultural tools, household items, and the occasional decorative piece for the local lord's manor. The truth is, blacksmiths were the ultimate multitaskers, juggling a range of projects to keep the village running smoothly. So, what's the real impact of these medieval metal maestros? They were the linchpins of their communities, the unsung heroes who kept society ticking along. Blacksmithing wasn't just a job, it was a vital service. From the plows that tilled the fields to the nails that held together homes, blacksmiths were the architects of daily life. Their work was a reminder that progress isn't just about grand inventions. It's about the countless small innovations that quietly shape the world. As you close up shop for the day, remember this. The legacy of the blacksmith isn't just about the past. It's about the enduring power of craftsmanship, innovation, and resilience. Blacksmiths were the original makers, the pioneers who forged the path for future generations. And while the world may have moved on from the clang of the anvil to the hum of the factory floor, the spirit of the blacksmith lives on in every innovation and every act of creation. So, here's to the blacksmiths, those medieval masters of metal who, with each swing of the hammer, shaped not just iron, but the very course of history. As you walk away from the forge, let the echoes of their legacy remind you that in every piece of metal, in every tool and technique, there's a story waiting to be told. And who knows, maybe one day, someone will look back and see the sparks of inspiration you left behind, just as we see the legacy of the blacksmiths today. You're standing in bustling ancient Carthage, your sandals slapping against the cobblestones as the Mediterranean sun beats down on your head. It's a city that smells like spices and ambition, with a hint of sea salt thrown in for good measure. Welcome to the heart of a trading empire where every street corner is a theatre of commerce, and every merchant a master of the ancient art of haggling. Sure, you might think of Rome as the big dog on the block, but Carthage... oh, Carthage is the sleek panther lurking in the shadows, ready to pounce on any opportunity that sails its way. Carthage's wealth didn't just fall from the sky, despite what their competitors might grumble. With a navy that's the envy of every seafaring nation, the Carthaginians have turned the Mediterranean into their personal playground. Picture this. Hundreds of ships, each a marvel of engineering and intimidation, slicing through the waves like sharks on a mission. These bad boys weren't just about showing off. They were the economic engine driving Carthage's prosperity. It's said that by the 3rd century BCE, Carthage was so flush with cash that even its elephants had bigger paychecks than your average Roman soldier. But let's not get carried away by the romantic notion of Carthage as some kind of ancient utopia. Sure, their navy was impressive, and their markets were overflowing with goods from every corner of the known world. But there's a darker undercurrent swirling beneath this prosperous surface. You see, Carthage had a bit of a reputation problem. The ancient world didn't just see them as savvy traders. They were also known for their rather intense rituals. Yep, we're diving headfirst into the murky waters of Carthaginian sacrifices, and it's not all sunshine and incense. Ah, the infamous Carthaginian child sacrifices. Probably not the kind of thing you'd bring up at a dinner party, unless you're looking to clear the room. Legend, or rather, Roman propaganda, would have you believed that the Carthaginians were bloodthirsty fanatics, sacrificing children like they were going out of style. But let's pump the brakes on that narrative for a second. The truth is a bit more nuanced than the ancient tabloids would have you think. The practice of child sacrifice, as grim as it sounds, wasn't just a blood sport for the Carthaginians. It was deeply embedded in their socio-political framework, a ritual that carried as much political weight as it did religious significance. When you hear the name Tafid, you might imagine some dark, foreboding place, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong. These were the sacred precincts where sacrifices were made, and they were as much about demonstrating loyalty and securing political alliances as they were about appeasing the gods. It's like a twisted form of public relations, where the stakes were as high as they could get. Now, it's easy to point fingers and say, those Carthaginians were savage. But hold up a second. Before you run off to join the Roman chorus of disdain, consider the context. Carthage was a city constantly under threat, both from external enemies and internal strife. The sacrifices, while undeniably brutal, were seen as a necessary means of ensuring the city's survival. It was a harsh world, and Carthage played by harsh rules. It's worth noting that our primary sources on Carthaginian rituals come from their enemies, namely the Romans and Greeks, who weren't exactly unbiased reporters. They had every reason to paint Carthage in the worst light possible. And sure, archaeology has uncovered urns containing the remains of children, but whether these were sacrificial victims or simply cremated remains of young ones who died of natural causes remains a hot topic among historians. So, while child sacrifice did occur, its scale and nature might not be as diabolical as the Romans made it out to be. But here's the kicker. For the Carthaginians, these rituals were also a form of political theatre. Sacrifices were often carried out in times of crisis, when the city needed to show unity and resolve. It was a way of saying, we're in this together, and were willing to make the toughest choices for our survival. In a world where the next war was always just over the horizon, such displays of commitment were crucial. So, as you wander through the vibrant markets of Carthage, catching snippets of conversations in a dozen different languages, remember that this city is a tapestry of contradictions. It's a place where prosperity and brutality coexist, where the hum of commerce is underpinned by the whisper of rituals. Carthage is a reminder that history is rarely black and white, and the stories we tell are often shaped by those with the loudest voices. As you navigate this ancient metropolis, keep your eyes open and your mind sharper than a Carthaginian dagger. There's more to Carthage than meets the eye, and we're just getting started on this fascinating, if occasionally gruesome, journey through its past. As you navigate the bustling heart of Carthage, it's easy to get caught up in the sensory overload of exotic spices and the melodic clang of coins in merchant pockets. But while your eyes feast on the vibrant tapestry of commerce, let's not lose sight of the city's darker side, the infamous child sacrifices that have left historians and archaeologists scratching their heads and the rest of us raising eyebrows in disbelief. We've got Roman writers to thank for the grisly tales that paint Carthaginians as the ultimate villains, but let's have a closer look, shall we? Peel back the layers of Roman spin, and you'll find a story that's both more complex and, strangely enough, more human. Picture the Tafet of Carthage, not your average park for a Sunday stroll, but rather a sacred precinct where the Carthaginians practiced their most controversial rituals. These were not random acts of cruelty, but highly organized ceremonies steeped in tradition. And while the Romans would have you believe that Carthage was a den of child-sacrificing fanatics, archaeological digs tell a story that's a bit more layered. In the early 20th century, archaeologists unearthed urns containing the tiny remains of infants and animals alike. Were these the sacrificial victims that Roman writers loved to harp on about? Or were they simply the cremated remains of children who succumbed to natural causes in a city where infant mortality was as common as a Mediterranean breeze? The Romans, bless their dramatic hearts, never missed an opportunity to cast Carthage as the big bad wolf of the ancient world. But let's not forget that these accounts were penned by Rome's own spin doctors, historians like Polybius and Diodorus Siculus, who were less concerned with truth and more with crafting a narrative that justified Rome's eventual conquest. Look at these barbarians, they'd say, with their child sacrifices and strange gods. Clearly, they need a good Roman civilizing. Yet, even if we take their tales with a grain of salt, there's no denying that something was happening at the Tafet. The urns, for one, are the real deal. Radiocarbon dating places many of them in the 8th to 2nd centuries BCE, right in the thick of Carthage's glory days. And while the Romans spun tales of mass sacrifice, the actual number of urns suggests a practice that was significant, but perhaps not as widespread as Rome would have you believe. We're talking a few thousand urns over several centuries, not exactly the slaughterhouse imagery the Roman writers loved to conjure. But why focus on sacrifice at all? Why not just build a bunch of temples, toss in a couple of statues, and call it a day? Well, here's where things get interesting. Sacrifice in Carthage wasn't just about appeasing angry guards with a taste for the dramatic. It was also a tool for social control, a way to manage the ambitions of the city's elite. Think about it. If you're a wealthy Carthaginian family with political aspirations, participating in these rituals was your ticket to the upper echelons of society. It was about showing loyalty, proving that you were willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for the city's well-being. In a sense, the Tafet functioned like a twisted social contract. The elites, those families with enough clout to influence policy and sway decisions, offered their most precious assets, their children, to demonstrate their commitment to Carthage. In return, they secured their place within the city's power structure. It's a grim calculus, but in a world where alliances were as fragile as papyrus and wars as frequent as market days, showing that level of dedication could be the difference between maintaining your status or watching it crumble like a poorly constructed amphitheater. And while the Romans might have painted this as barbaric, let's not pretend that their own society was a beacon of modernity. Gladiatorial games, anyone. The Romans knew a thing or two about blood sports themselves, even if they preferred their sacrifices to take place in an arena rather than a sacred grove. So, before we get too sanctimonious about Carthaginian rituals, let's remember that history's shades of grey can often outnumber even the most colourful Roman mosaic. As we sift through the rubble of ancient propaganda and sift the ashes of the Tafit, what emerges is not a clear picture of right and wrong, but rather a complex tableau of survival and sacrifice. Carthage was a city constantly on the brink, caught between the ambitions of its elite and the machinations of its enemies. And in that crucible, the harsh realities of life demanded equally harsh measures. So, as you wander back through the bustling streets of Carthage, weaving between merchants hawking their wares and sailors swapping stories of distant lands, remember that beneath the surface of this ancient metropolis lies a history as intricate as any of the goods on display. From the sacred precincts of the Tafit to the bustling heart of the marketplace, Carthage was a city that lived by its own rules, forging a path through history that was as bold as it was brutal. And while the Romans may have had the last word, the story of Carthage survives, not just in the ashes of its sacrifices, but in the vibrant legacy of a people who dared to challenge the world. Now, as we pivot from ashes and urns to armored glory, let's talk about Carthage's not-so-secret weapon, the sacred band of Baal Hammon. Think of them as the Navy SEAL of their day, except with more bronze and fewer night vision goggles. This elite corps of warriors wasn't just about brawn. They were the living embodiment of Carthaginian martial prowess, and a prime example of how a city could flex its military muscle without breaking a sweat. And yes, they had a reputation that would make even the most hardened Roman legionary think twice before crossing their path. The sacred band was essentially a fraternity of finely trained, heavily armed hoplites who wore their elite status like a badge of honor, literally, in the form of shiny armor that could blind an enemy on a sunny day. These soldiers were the cream of the Carthaginian crop. Unlike the mercenaries that often filled the ranks of Carthage's military forces, these guys were citizens. And not just any citizens, but the upper echelon, the creme de la creme of Carthaginian society. We're talking about a bunch of guys whose family trees were more intricately woven than a Carthaginian tapestry. The training regimen for the sacred band was grueling, to say the least. Picture a boot camp designed by the god of war himself, with a sprinkle of North African sun to keep things interesting. These warriors were drilled in the arts of combat, strategy, and discipline, honing their skills to a razor's edge. You could almost hear the ancient drill sergeants shouting, "Spartans, eat your heart out." And while the Spartans may have had their legendary phalanx formation, the sacred band wasn't far behind. They were a tightly knit unit, moving as one, a deadly dance of shields and spears that could turn the tide of battle. But hold on a second. Why would a thrifty trading empire like Carthage invest so heavily in a bunch of well-armored locals when they could just hire more mercenaries at a fraction of the cost? Here's where things get interesting. The sacred band wasn't just about creating an effective fighting force. It was also a brilliant piece of political theater. By showcasing their own citizens as elite warriors, Carthage sent a clear message to both allies and enemies. We've got skin in the game, and we're not afraid to show it. The economic implications of maintaining such a force were significant. We're talking about salaries, armor, weapons, and the occasional victory feast, all expenses that added up. But for Carthage, the cost was worth it. The sacred band was not only a deterrent against aggressors, but also a symbol of unity and strength, keeping the citizenry in line and reminding everyone just who ran the show in this Mediterranean powerhouse. And let's not forget the myths that swirled around these soldiers, like the morning mist over the hills of North Africa. The idea of their invincibility was both a recruitment tool and a psychological weapon. The tales of their exploits were the stuff of legend, whispered in the markets and sung by bards who knew how to spin a good yarn. For young Carthaginians growing up under the shadow of that imposing navy, joining the sacred band was like being inducted into an exclusive club, one where the membership card was a spear and shield. But were they truly invincible? That's the million sesterces question. The truth is, like many legends, the reality was a bit more grounded. Sure, the sacred band had their share of victories, but they were not immune to the harsh realities of warfare. They bled, they fell, and sometimes they lost. Yet the myth of their invincibility served a dual purpose. It bolstered the morale of Carthaginian allies and sowed doubt in the hearts of their enemies. After all, fear is a powerful ally, and the sacred band wielded it like a finely honed weapon. In many ways, the sacred band was a precursor to modern military units that rely not just on physical prowess, but also on psychological warfare. They understood the power of perception, the importance of morale, and the impact of a well-placed rumor. If an enemy believed they were facing an unstoppable force, half the battle was already won. And for Carthage, that perception was worth its weight in gold-plated shields. So, as you stroll through the ancient streets of Carthage, imagining the clatter of armor and the disciplined march of the sacred band, consider the legacy they left behind. They were more than just soldiers. They were symbols of a city that balanced on the knife's edge of power and precariousness. For Carthage, the sacred band was a reminder that strength wasn't just about having the biggest army or the fastest ships. It was about crafting a narrative, one that could inspire allies and intimidate adversaries in equal measure. And as we continue this journey through the annals of Carthaginian history, remember that every myth has its roots in reality, every legend a kernel of truth. We'll delve further into the intricacies of Carthage's military machine, the economic gears that kept it running, and the societal dynamics that fueled its rise, and eventually its fall. But for now, let the echoes of the sacred band's footsteps guide you through the past, as we unravel the mysteries of a city that dared to challenge the world. So, as the dust settles from the sacred band's parade through your imagination, let's pivot to another cornerstone of Carthaginian society, the temple economy. Ah yes, religion and economy, the ancient power couple. Think of it as the original influencer brand partnership, where guards and gold worked hand in hand to keep Carthage's commercial empire humming along like a well-oiled chariot. In Carthage, temples weren't just places to toss up a quick prayer or sacrifice. They were the financial hubs, the Wall Street of the ancient world, where spiritual devotion and economic ambition met in a heady cocktail of incense and profit margins. The reality is, if you were a Carthaginian looking to make a name for yourself, you'd better have temple connections, or at least know someone who did. Let's start with the basics. The temples in Carthage weren't just spiritual centers, they were economic powerhouses. You see, these sacred spaces doubled as banks. Forget the image of monks in quiet contemplation. Carthaginian priests were more like ancient investment bankers, managing wealth and assets with a keen eye on the bottom line. The temples held vast amounts of treasure, from silver bars to gold coins, collected through donations, tributes, and the occasional suggested offering. It was a divine economy, where the guards acted as silent partners in a very lucrative business. And let's talk numbers. By the 4th century BCE, the temple of Baal Hammon, the head honcho of Carthaginian deities, was said to have amassed a fortune that could rival the GDP of a small country. We're talking about riches that would make even the most opulent of Roman senators green with envy. These riches didn't just sit idly in temple vaults. They were actively invested in trade ventures, loaned to merchants, and used to fund military campaigns. It was a virtuous cycle, or a vicious one, depending on your perspective, where religion and commerce fed off each other. Now, how exactly did these temples manage to sustain such economic clout? The answer lies in Carthage's strategic position as a Mediterranean trade hub. Picture it. Ships from all over the ancient world, laden with exotic goods, docking at Carthaginian ports. This bustling trade network didn't just fill the city's coffers, it also filled the temple's treasuries. Merchants, eager to curry favor with the guards and hedge their bets against the capricious seas, would offer a slice of their profits to the temples. It was a divine insurance policy, one that ensured both spiritual blessings and financial backing. But here's where things get really interesting. The rituals conducted in these temples weren't just about placating the guards. They were also public spectacles that reinforced Carthaginian social hierarchy. Picture it as ancient performance art, where the city's elite could flaunt their wealth and piety in one grand, incense-filled display. And let's not forget the priests themselves, who wielded significant power. They were the gatekeepers, the brokers of divine favor, and they knew how to leverage their influence to sway both public opinion and political decisions. For the average Carthaginian, attending these temple rituals was part religious observance, part social event. It was a chance to see and be seen, to rub shoulders with the movers and shakers of Carthaginian society. And for the elites, it was a not-so-subtle reminder of who held the reins of power. The temples, with their towering columns and lavish ceremonies, were a constant reminder of the divine and human hierarchy, a two-for-one deal that kept both the guards and the populace satisfied, or at the very least, distracted. But let's not get too carried away by the grandeur of it all. Beneath the surface, this temple economy was a finely tuned machine, one that relied on a delicate balance of fear, faith, and finance. The priests, with their fingers on the pulse of both religious and economic life, were as much politicians as they were spiritual leaders. They understood the power of belief, and not just in a divine sense. The belief in the system, in the rituals, in the very fabric of Carthaginian society, was the glue that held it all together. And while the Romans may have scoffed at Carthaginian religious practices, their own temples functioned in much the same way. It was a classic case of the pot calling the kettle black, as both civilizations used religion as a tool for maintaining social order and economic prosperity. So, before we dismiss the Carthaginian temple economy as a relic of a bygone era, let's remember that its echoes can be heard even today in the ways religion and economy continue to intersect. As you wander through the ruins of ancient Carthage, it's hard not to imagine the bustling life that once filled these sacred spaces. The clink of coins, the murmur of prayers, the rustle of silks, all part of a vibrant tapestry that wove together the spiritual and the material in a way that was uniquely Carthaginian. And as we delve deeper into this ancient world, peeling back the layers of history and myth, remember that the story of Carthage is a reminder of the intricate dance between power and prosperity, faith and finance. So, as we leave the temple precincts behind and set our sights on the next chapter of Carthaginian history, let's keep our eyes open and our minds sharp. There's more to this ancient city than meets the eye, and we're just scratching the surface of its complex, compelling past. The journey continues, and the story of Carthage, with all its contradictions and complexities, is far from over. As we leave the bustling temple precincts behind, the legacy of Carthage isn't just etched into the ruins underfoot, it's warped into the tales told by those who followed. Let's face it, Carthage has been both the hero and the villain in the epic saga of history, a city that's been romanticized as a beacon of ancient resilience and simultaneously demonized as a den of pagan iniquity. How'd they manage that kind of PR whiplash, you ask? Well, pull up a cushion, because this is where history gets juicier than a Roman grape harvest. First up, the romanticized version. Picture Carthage as the underdog of the ancient Mediterranean, a bustling hub of trade and culture, forever gallantly holding out against the lumbering juggernaut that was Rome. The image of a sleek, innovative society with a flair for maritime dominance is the stuff of legend. Their navy, their commerce, their audacious elephants thundering into battle, Carthage was a city that dared to defy the narrative of Roman superiority. For anyone with a soft spot for the rebellious spirit, Carthage is a tale of plucky defiance, a city that refused to roll over for the supposed might of civilization. But here's the kicker. For every starry-eyed retelling, there's an equally vivid depiction of Carthage as the bogeyman of antiquity. The Romans, those master narrators with a flair for drama, were more than happy to paint Carthage in the darkest hues available on their palette. To them, the Carthaginians were the ultimate villain, a society steeped in strange rituals and unspeakable sacrifices. Forget about nuanced cultural practices. To the Romans, Carthage was the embodiment of barbarism, a cautionary tale of what happens when you mix too much incense with too little Roman decorum. Why the divergence? Well, it turns out that history, much like social media, is all about who controls the narrative. The Romans, with their penchant for conquest and their literary flair, were not only writing the history books, they were publishing them with a hefty dose of creative license. And boy, did they weave a tale. By the time they were done, Carthage wasn't just a rival, it was a cultural scapegoat, a society that, in the Roman mind, needed to be wiped out to make way for the glory of Rome. But hang on to your laurel wreaths, because there's more to this story. You see, the perception of Carthage didn't just stop evolving with the fall of the city in 146 BCE. Oh no, it kept on morphing through the ages. Medieval scholars, enamored with the dramatic flair of ancient texts, latched onto the idea of Carthage as a cautionary tale, a narrative that dovetailed nicely with their own moralistic agendas. Carthage, for them, became a symbol of what happens when a society strays from the righteous path, a convenient allegory for the dangers of straying too far from the fold. Fast forward a few centuries, and you've got modern historians attempting to peel back the layers of myth and legend like they're stripping an ancient vase of its patina. The goal: to find the real Carthage beneath the centuries of spin. It's a bit like trying to reconstruct a shattered amphora from fragments scattered across the ages, with each piece offering a tantalizing glimpse of the whole, yet never quite fitting together as neatly as you'd like. So, what does all this tell us about Carthage, and about us? For one, it underscores the importance of context. History isn't just a list of dates and events. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of culture, economy, and power dynamics. When we look at Carthage, we're not just seeing an ancient city. We're seeing a reflection of the forces that shaped its rise and fall, an intricate dance of trade and tradition, ambition and adversity. And here's the real kicker. Our interpretations of Carthage tell us as much about our own values and biases as they do about the Carthaginians themselves. Whether we see Carthage as a romanticized beacon of defiance or a cautionary tale of hubris depends as much on our own cultural lens as it does on the historical facts. In the end, the legacy of Carthage is a reminder that history is as much about the stories we choose to tell as it is about the events themselves. As we wrap up our whirlwind tour through the streets and stories of Carthage, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've uncovered. We've traversed a city that was as much a marketplace of ideas as it was of goods, a place where the clamor of commerce intermingled with the whisper of rituals. We've seen how Carthage's economic and military might were matched only by its capacity for reinvention, a city that, even in its ashes, continues to spark debate and intrigue. So, as you tuck away this tale into the annals of your own memory, remember that history is rarely as simple as it seems. It's a complex, multifaceted narrative that challenges us to look beyond the surface and ask the hard questions. What makes a society thrive? What leads to its downfall? And how do the stories we tell about the past shape our understanding of the present? In the end, Carthage serves as both a mirror and a mystery, a civilization that, despite its destruction, lives on in the stories we've told, the myths we've debunked, and the lessons we've learned. As you drift off, let those thoughts percolate like the rich brews once traded across Carthaginian markets. History is a conversation, and now you're part of it. Sweet dreams of ancient empires, and may your imagination sail as far and wide as a Carthaginian trireme. If you've ever wondered what happens when a Roman emperor decides to play real-life Sim City, look no further than Constantine the Great. In 330 AD, he took one look at the ancient city of Byzantium and said, "This is the spot." And just like that, Constantine's vision for the future of Rome unfolded in the form of Constantinople. He wasn't just picking a random dot on the map, though. No, this was a strategic masterstroke, a geographical mic drop, if you will. Constantinople was perched at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, a prime piece of real estate that would make any realtor drool. The Bosporus Strait was the neck that connected the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, making Constantinople the bouncer at the door of two continents. It was like setting up shop at the busiest intersection on the Silk Road, where East met West, and everyone wanted a piece of the trading action. Forget Wall Street. This was the original economic powerhouse. The city's location wasn't its only selling point. Constantinople was encased like a medieval Fabergé egg, fortified with Theodosian walls that could give Fort Knox a run for its money. These walls stood 12 meters high, stretching over 5 kilometers, and they were the gold standard of ancient defense systems. But let's not get too carried away with the myth of the unbreakable city. Sure, those walls were impressive, and they did their job well enough to make invaders think twice. But spoiler alert, no city is unbreakable, and Constantinople eventually learned that the hard way. More on that later. The Byzantine Empire wasn't just a geographical or military marvel. It was a cultural melting pot that blended Greco-Roman traditions with Eastern influences. Imagine an empire where classical philosophy shook hands with Eastern mysticism, and you've got a society that was as culturally rich as it was complex. This was no ordinary Roman Empire, too. Zero. It was a new beast that would redefine the ancient world. Greek was the lingua franca, but the city was as cosmopolitan as they came, with influences from Persian, Slavic, Arab, and Turkic cultures. It was like the United Nations, but with more togas and fewer speeches. Economically, Constantinople was the ancient world's version of Amazon Prime. The trade routes that snaked through the empire brought in spices from India, silk from China, and grain from Egypt. The city thrived on commerce, and its markets were the heartbeats of its economy. By the 5th century, it was the wealthiest city in Europe, a title it held onto with a grip tighter than a miser's purse strings. The Byzantine gold solidus became the dollar of its time, accepted from the British Isles to the Middle East. Forget Bitcoin. Byzantium was the original currency disruptor. But let's not put on rose-colored glasses here. The empire's prosperity wasn't just about savvy trading and military prowess. It also involved a fair share of politicking, backstabbing, and a healthy dose of religious controversy. Constantine himself set the stage for centuries of theological debates when he convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, trying to put the Arian controversy to bed. Spoiler, the religious squabbles didn't exactly end there. So, was the Byzantine Empire a shining beacon of civilization? Depends on who you ask. To some, it was the glorious successor to Rome, a bastion of culture and Christianity. To others, it was a decadent relic, clinging to power with all the grace of a toddler holding onto a security blanket. But no one can deny its staying power. The empire would last for over 1,000 years, outliving its Western Roman sibling by a millennium. That's like being the tortoise to Rome's hare, slow, steady, and ultimately victorious, at least for a long stretch. In the grand tapestry of history, the Byzantine Empire was a dazzling thread, one woven with as much intrigue and complexity as the plots of the Game of Thrones. And like any epic saga, it had its fair share of heroes, villains, and plot twists that would make even George R. Martin raise an eyebrow. But for now, we leave the city of Constantinople at the height of its new beginnings, brimming with potential and poised to become one of the most influential, if not enigmatic, empires the world has ever seen. Stay tuned, because this is only the beginning of our Byzantine adventure, and trust me, it's a roller coaster worth riding. And so we dive headfirst into the Byzantine Golden Age under an emperor who had a vision as grand as his imperial titles, Justinian I. The man was a walking testament to ambition, a blend of visionary and micromanager who made Steve Jobs look like a slacker. Ascending the throne in 527 AD, Justinian was all about expansion, innovation, and let's be honest, a bit of a control freak. First on his to-do list, reclaiming the glory of the Roman Empire. He wasn't just content with ruling a chunk of the ancient world. He wanted the whole enchilada back under one roof. Cue the military campaigns led by his star general, Belisarius. They were like a historical buddy cop duo, with Justinian as the brains and Belisarius as the brawn. Their escapades took them across North Africa, Italy, and even parts of Spain. If you think that sounds like a logistical nightmare, you're not wrong. However, the catch with Justinian's grand plans was that they came with a hefty price tag. Wars don't pay for themselves, after all. The treasury took hit after hit, like a boxer in the ring with Mike Tyson. By the time the dust settled, the empire was stretched thinner than a hipster's wallet after a trip to the organic farmer's market. The mixed success of these campaigns was a reminder that ambition, while admirable, often comes with unintended consequences. But hey, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Justinian had a trump card up his sleeve, the construction of the Hagia Sophia. Now, if you've ever seen this architectural marvel, you might have wondered if aliens had a hand in it. Completed in 537 AD, this basilica was like nothing anyone had ever seen, an architectural mic drop that left the ancient world gaping. The dome alone was a feat of engineering wizardry, rising 55 meters high and spanning 31 meters across. This was not just a building, it was a statement, a symbol of divine authority, and a very tangible in-your-face to anyone doubting the empire's glory. But let's not kid ourselves. The Hagia Sophia didn't just pop up overnight. It took over 10,000 workers and a budget that could have funded a small nation. The cost, a staggering 320,000 pounds of gold, or roughly $6 billion in today's terms. So, while it dazzled the eyes, it also bled the treasury dry, a shiny reminder that sometimes beauty comes at a steep price. And speaking of steep prices, let's talk about the Nika riots of 532 AD, a textbook case of how quickly things can go south when you least expect it. Picture this. Thousands of citizens, whipped into a frenzy by high taxes and political discontent, converged on the Hippodrome, the local arena that made the Colosseum look like amateur hour. Nika, they chanted, meaning conquer, though it might as well have been burn it all down. This wasn't just a bit of rabble-rousing. It was a full-blown uprising threatening to topple Justinian's reign. The emperor, holed up in his palace, was ready to throw in the towel. Enter Theodora, his wife and co-empress, with a backbone made of steel. She famously declared she'd rather die an empress than live in exile. Her words turned the tide, and Justinian rallied his forces to crush the rebellion, which left tens of thousands dead and the city smouldering. Out of the ashes, Justinian emerged stronger and more determined than ever. But let's not sugarcoat it. His rule was as much about survival as it was about success. The Nika riots were a stark reminder of the volatility bubbling beneath the empire's polished surface. Even as he put down rebellions and built jaw-dropping cathedrals, Justinian was busy codifying Roman law, a project that could bore a courtroom stenographer to tears, but was crucial for legal nerds everywhere. The Corpus Juris Civilis, or body of civil law, was the emperor's passion project, a comprehensive legal code that sought to streamline centuries of Roman legislation into something coherent and, dare I say, usable. It was a legal revolution, laying the groundwork for civil law systems that still underpin many modern legal frameworks. So the next time you're arguing over a parking ticket, you can thank Justinian for the legal procedures that make it possible. Despite his accomplishments, Justinian's reign was a cautionary tale of how ambition can be both a force of creation and destruction. The empire's lavish spending was its double-edged sword, a source of strength in its ability to awe and inspire, yet also its Achilles heel, leading to economic strain and discontent. The emperor's vision was grand, but the reality was a complicated dance between progress and peril, a balancing act that left even the most skilled performers teetering on the edge. As we pause on the brink of the next chapter in Byzantine history, it's clear that Justinian's legacy is as complex as the empire he sought to shape. His reign was a testament to the power of vision and the peril of overreach, a reminder that while history is shaped by grand ambitions, it's often the unpredictable twists and turns that leave the deepest marks. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the Byzantine saga, where the stakes are high and the drama never ceases to amaze. So, Justinian's reign left us with a Byzantine empire both dazzling and dangerously stretched. Fast forward a bit, and we're entering the 7th century, a time when the empire was about to face some serious existential crises. If Justinian's era was the empire's golden spotlight moment, what followed was like the hangover after a wild party. The Byzantine Empire was suddenly caught in a blender of relentless warfare, as if someone cranked the dial to chaos. Now, let's talk about why those borders were playing a game of musical chairs. First up, we have the Persians, who were like that persistent neighbor always peeking over the fence. By the 620s, they had captured key territories like Egypt and Syria, which were not just any pieces of land. These areas were the empire's breadbasket, its economic lifeline. Imagine losing your bank account and pantry all in one swipe. Yeah, it was a big deal. Then, as if the Persians weren't enough of a headache, the 7th century brought the Arabs into the fray. Under the banner of Islam, they emerged as a new and formidable force, and the Byzantines quickly realized they had a serious problem on their hands. The Arabs captured Jerusalem in 637 AD, and by 642 they had taken Egypt. The loss of these regions wasn't just a territorial blow. It was like having the rug pulled out from under the empire's feet. The Byzantine economy, already on wobbly legs, was now teetering precariously. And let's not forget the Bulgars, who decided the Balkans were ripe for the picking. They established the First Bulgarian Empire in 681, and like a bad case of the flu, they just wouldn't go away. The Byzantines were now surrounded and harried on all sides, their borders as stable as a Jenga tower in the final stages of a game. But here's the kicker. Despite these setbacks, the Byzantines didn't just roll over and play dead. They were like that scrappy underdog in a sports movie, taking punches but refusing to stay down. Enter the Byzantine military, which deserves its own superhero theme song. The Empire's survival during these turbulent times was largely due to its military reforms. The defensive strategy was reinvented with the theme system. No, not a catchy jingle, but a new way of organizing the Empire's military and administrative districts. The themes were regions governed by military commanders, who were responsible for defending their turf with local troops. This was a stroke of genius, allowing for rapid mobilization and a more localized defense. It was like having a fire department stationed in every neighborhood, ready to douse flames before they spread. Meanwhile, on the home front, things weren't exactly hunky-dory. The 8th century saw the rise of iconoclasm, a movement that basically said, "No more pictures of Jesus. Thank you very much." This wasn't just a minor theological squabble. It was a full-blown crisis that rocked the empire to its core. The iconoclasts wanted to ban religious images, believing they were a form of idolatry. On the other side were the iconophiles, who loved their icons and weren't about to give them up without a fight. The controversy split the empire like a Thanksgiving dinner argument over politics, only with way more at stake. This internal strife wasn't just about religious beliefs. It was a battle for control and influence. Emperors like Leo Roman III and his son Constantine V were staunch iconoclasts, while their successors often flipped the script. The whole debacle was like a pendulum swinging back and forth, leaving the empire dizzy and divided. But wait, there's more. The Byzantine navy deserves a shout-out for its role in keeping the empire afloat, sometimes literally. They had a secret weapon that was the ancient equivalent of a nuke, Greek fire. This stuff was the original don't-try-this-at-home concoction, a mysterious incendiary weapon that could burn on water. Picture a medieval flamethrower, and you're in the right ballpark. Greek fire was a game-changer in naval warfare, giving the Byzantines an edge over their maritime foes and thwarting sieges that could have spelled doom for Constantinople. So how did the Byzantines manage to pick themselves up after these relentless blows? Resilience, pure and simple. The empire had a knack for adapting, like a chameleon on steroids. They absorbed new cultures, reformed their military, and navigated the stormy seas of religious and political turmoil. It was a testament to their tenacity that they not only survived, but eventually bounced back stronger. By the time we hit the 9th century, the Byzantines were on the road to recovery. They started reclaiming lost territories and stabilizing their economy. The Macedonian dynasty, beginning with Basil I in 867, marked a new era of expansion and consolidation. But that's a story for another day, as the Byzantine saga continues to unfold with more twists and turns than a soap opera plotline. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll see how the Byzantines continue to reinvent themselves, dealing with new threats and challenges while trying to keep their empire from crumbling like a cookie in milk. There's plenty more drama and intrigue to come, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. As we peek into the 10th century, the Byzantine Empire was shaking off its past like a dog after a bath, and diving headfirst into a golden age under the Macedonian dynasty. The empire was in full comeback mode, like a rock band reuniting for another hit album. Basil I kicked things off in 867, but his successors, especially the charismatic Basil Roman II, turned the volume up to 11. Let's start with the economic revival that had Byzantine merchants grinning like Cheshire cats. Trade routes that had once resembled ghost towns were now bustling with activity. The empire became a commercial hotspot, with Constantinople acting as the ancient world's answer to Rodeo Drive. Goods poured in from all corners, spices from the east, furs from the north, and exotic textiles that could make even the most jaded fashionista swoon. The Byzantine currency, the solidus, was still the gold standard, literally. It was like the empire had found a cheat code for prosperity. This economic boom wasn't just about fancy imports and exports, though. It was also about cold, hard cash, and lots of it. The Byzantine treasury was flush, allowing the empire to pay its soldiers, fund public works, and build lavish structures that screamed, "We're back, baby." The imperial palace was a sight to behold, a sprawling complex that made Buckingham Palace look like a starter home. While the merchants were busy lining their pockets, the Byzantine military was flexing its muscles in a series of stunning victories. Basil Roman II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, was the empire's answer to a WWII superstar. He took on the Bulgars with a ruthless efficiency that shocked his enemies and thrilled his supporters. The Battle of Cladion in 1014 was a turning point, as Basil Roman II defeated the Bulgar army with a tactical prowess that would make any chess grandmaster proud. He famously blinded 99 out of every 100 prisoners, leaving the last one with a single eye to lead the others home. A grim, if not effective, message that the Byzantines were not to be trifled with. But let's not get too wrapped up in the glory. Behind the scenes, the empire was dealing with more drama than a daytime soap opera. Internal corruption was as rampant as ever, with officials lining their pockets faster than they could say imperial decree. The wealth gap was wider than the Grand Canyon, with the rich living in opulence while the poor struggled to scrape by. It was like a tale of two cities, except they were all crammed into Constantinople. The cultural renaissance that accompanied the economic and military successes was a double-edged sword. On one hand, the arts flourished. Scholars and philosophers flocked to Constantinople, turning it into a beacon of learning and culture. The Macedonian Renaissance was akin to the High Renaissance in Italy, with a Byzantine twist. Manuscripts were copied, ancient texts were preserved, and new ideas blossomed like flowers after a spring rain. Yet, this cultural boom also highlighted the empire's internal contradictions. While the elites indulged in the finer things, the average citizen was left out in the cold, both figuratively and literally. The divide between the haves and the have-nots was deepening, and no amount of gilded mosaics could plaster over that reality. Meanwhile, the church was having its own existential crisis. The Great Schism of 1054 was looming on the horizon, like a storm cloud ready to drench a sunny picnic. The religious tension between the Eastern Orthodox and Western Roman Catholic churches was more palpable than a family feud at Thanksgiving. Issues of doctrine, liturgical practices, and the infamous filioque clause were all hot topics, with both sides as stubborn as a mule in a carrot shop. Beneath the empire's shiny exterior, these tensions simmered, setting the stage for future upheaval. The Byzantines were riding high, but the cracks in their foundation were spreading like a ripple across a pond. The question wasn't if they would face challenges, but when. And as the 11th century dawned, those challenges were lining up like eager contestants on a game show. The empire would soon have to contend with not just internal decay, but external threats that would test its mettle in ways it hadn't anticipated. The Seljuk Turks were gathering steam, and their ambitions were as boundless as their cavalry. The Byzantine Empire was approaching a crossroads, and the choices it made would reverberate through the corridors of history. So, while the Macedonian dynasty was a time of triumph and transformation, it was also a prelude to the trials that lay ahead. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the next act promised to be as thrilling as the last. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the Byzantine saga, where the past is never truly past, and the future is as unpredictable as a Byzantine court intrigue. And just as the Byzantines were poised to face new challenges, enter the Fourth Crusade, a misadventure so off-track it makes the Titanic look like a pleasure cruise. Originally, the Crusaders were supposed to march into the Holy Land, but somehow they ended up sacking Constantinople in 1204, like pirates who forgot to read the treasure map. So, how did we get here? Chalk it up to a cocktail of miscommunication, financial desperation, and opportunism. The Crusaders were low on cash, and Venice, their transportation service with a fleet, wasn't running a charity. To pay their dues, the Crusaders agreed to help Venice capture the rival city of Zara. That detour was just the appetizer. The main course, Constantinople itself, served up by a deposed Byzantine prince promising riches and Crusader support in exchange for his throne. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for anyone involved. When the dust settled, Constantinople was a shadow of its former self. The city was looted, its treasures carted off like party favors at a disastrous family reunion. The Byzantine Empire was carved up, with the Latin Empire taking the lion's share. The once impregnable city, with its gleaming Hagia Sophia and golden mosaics, was left in ruins, a testament to the chaotic mess left behind by the Crusaders' misguided adventures. The Fourth Crusade was more than just a military debacle. It was a seismic shift in the balance of power. Byzantium, the new Rome, was now a fragmented patchwork of territories. The empire's economy, already teetering like a Jenga tower, took a nosedive. Trade routes were disrupted, and the Byzantine currency lost its luster, no longer the gold standard it once was. The empire's financial woes were as deep as the Bosporus, with no easy way out. As if things weren't bad enough, political infighting turned the Byzantine court into a medieval soap opera. The emperors were more like revolving door monarchs, each one trying to out-scheme the last. Alliances shifted as fast as fashion trends, leaving the empire as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. The Byzantine aristocracy was engaged in a constant game of thrones, each faction vying for power with all the grace of a bull in a china shop. Fast forward to the 14th century, and the empire's situation was as bleak as a rainy Monday. The Ottomans, under Sultan Osman I and his successors, were on the rise, casting a long shadow over Asia Minor. The Byzantine emperors were reduced to watching their lands shrink like a sweater in the dryer, powerless to stop the tide of Ottoman expansion. By 1400, the Byzantine Empire was little more than a city-state, with Constantinople as its crown jewel, albeit a tarnished one. The Ottomans weren't just any adversary, they were a juggernaut. Their military prowess was backed by a sophisticated bureaucracy and a knack for integrating conquered peoples into their empire. They were the Swiss army knife of empires, versatile, efficient, and always ready for action. The Byzantines, meanwhile, were like an old relic, struggling to keep up in a world that had moved on. The final act came in 1453, when Sultan Mehmed Roman II, a young leader with the ambition of Alexander the Great, set his sights on Constantinople. The siege was a masterclass in military strategy, with the Ottomans deploying everything from massive cannons to naval blockades. The Byzantines held out with the determination of a cornered animal, but they were hopelessly outmatched. On May 29, 1453, Constantinople fell, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire. The city, once the heart of a mighty empire, was now an Ottoman prize. The fall of Constantinople was more than just the end of an empire. It was a turning point in history. The Byzantine Empire, which had stood for over 1,000 years, was gone, but its legacy was far from forgotten. The empire had been a bridge between East and West, a crucible of culture and ideas. Its influence could still be felt, from the legal codes of Europe to the art and architecture that inspired the Renaissance. The myths of Rome's eternal city endured, a testament to Byzantium's lasting impact. In modern culture, the Byzantine Empire is often viewed through a romantic lens, a world of glittering mosaics and grand cathedrals. But the reality was far more complex, a story of ambition and decline, resilience in the face of adversity, and a constant struggle to maintain relevance in an ever-changing world. The empire's history is a reminder that no power is eternal, and that the forces of change are relentless. As we look back on the rise and fall of the Byzantine Empire, it's clear that history is not just a tale of triumphs and defeats. It's a story of human endeavor, of society striving to adapt and survive in the face of overwhelming odds. The Byzantines may have ultimately fallen, but their legacy lives on, a testament to their ingenuity and resilience. In the grand tapestry of history, the Byzantine Empire is a thread that continues to captivate, a story of a civilization that burned brightly before fading into the annals of time. And so, as we conclude this Byzantine saga, we find ourselves enriched by its lessons, a reminder that history's echoes can still be heard in the present.